So welcome back to the third ASA International Forum 2022. So we will begin with Mr. Samuel Barclay, Principal and Co-founder of Case Design, with the topic of craft of collaboration. And our moderator for this next session is Mr. 𝗕𝗿𝗄𝗆𝗿, Chairman of ASA Forum 2022. So let's start the craft of collaboration.
Hi, my name is Samuel Barclay, and I wanted to express my appreciation to the Association of Siamese Architects for inviting me to share our work today. I run a small practice here in Mumbai with my partners, Erica Barclay and Celine Batri. We're architecture, interiors, and product design practice, and we've been working for the last 7 or 8 years here in India. And I wanted to share a little bit about our work today and our process of collaboration. One of the main reasons that we decided to practice here in India is the ability that we have to engage with local artisans, craftsmen, the incredibly rich and diverse sort of skill sets that exist for all different kinds of making. I'm originally trained as an architect and engineer, but I've always been very passionate about workshop culture. And this is a small quotation that I came across that talks a little bit about tacit knowledge as opposed to sort of academic knowledge. And I just wanted to share that, the idea that this kind of information, the way that teaching and knowledge is passed down through generations, that it's rooted in context and experience and practice and values. So we, as an organization, as a studio, take a lot of inspiration from that. We're a very collaborative design studio, both in and amongst ourselves, but also with other artisans, practitioners, technicians, artists, and I'll illustrate some of those collaborations and workings here in the following slides. This was a project that we were preparing to do in the mountains between Oman and Dubai. And what we found interesting about it was that this is a small house that you can see here on the right. We had planned to build this house in rammed earth. And when we started our explorations and our samples, mock-ups, things like that, we had engaged with some local contractors, or who we thought were local contractors, and ended up turning out to be from the mountains of Afghanistan. And what was really fascinating for me about that process and that dialogue was that as soon as we started talking about how we planned to build the house, they immediately started building a model themselves out of earth, out of clay, out of mud, just from the site itself, and just started to describe how they built their homes for themselves back in the region of the world where they were from. Back in India, again, part of my interest and excitement for practicing here is our ability to engage in a very, very rich workshop culture. Our ability to sort of turn a sketch into a sample, into a mock-up, then going directly into the materials, and then those things can very quickly become sort of realized as parts, pieces, products, surfaces, materials, finishes, both at the scale of product design, but also at the scale of architecture as well. So we do a lot of testing, modeling, sampling. Obviously we do digital work as well, but part of the joy here is to see those things realized and manifested in real full-scale objects and artifacts. This was a chair that we had worked on. We were doing a small cafe. They needed to house 10 of these chairs in a very, very small space. So these pieces actually fold up into 40 millimeters thick. And so out of our architectural design practice, it leads very quickly and easily into sort of product design as well, trying to provide real solutions, again, engaging with artisans and carpenters, people who work with leather, who work with brass, who work with timber, who work with stone, plasters, different materials, and different trades contribute significantly to our practice. Again, working with them not just for the production of things, but for the design. This is actually a drawing that they've made in the workshop. Obviously, we sit with them, we work with them, we engage, we give them everything from sketches to computer drawings. But when it comes time to actually produce the object, a lot of times just before it's manifested, it results in a full-scale 1:1 drawing that they make themselves. And so that engagement from conceptual idea translating into materials and methods, ways of finishing, ways of assembly, for me is a really exciting part of the process. This is a small collection of pieces that we've put together. About 5 or 6 years ago, we started the brand Case Goods, which again came out of our architectural practice, and from there it's grown. We now have stockists around the world that sell some of these pieces, and we hope that it continues to grow along with the architecture. As I mentioned before, the idea of engaging with the craftsperson who's going to be making it. This is, again, a full-scale drawing. This is now moves to the scale of architecture. This is a window section. This is a drawing that 𝗙𝗺𝗃 𝗠, who's the carpenter that I'm working with, has made himself, he and his team. And so looking at how everything from materials, finish, operations, how these windows slide, locks, latches, how things as mundane as how do you keep water out. Those kinds of things get worked out on the prototypes, on the samples, through conversation, through dialogue. And so if we reflect back on that idea of tacit knowledge, for me, that kind of experience, dialogue, collaboration in its truest sense is very much a part of how that we practice every day. That translates too to other materials and finishes. So these are a series of tiles that we made with artisans, a sort of very rough but soft and beautiful pink finish that we developed with local materials here in Gujarat, just north of Mumbai, and an architect in my studio and an artist from Copenhagen, who you'll see and hear a little bit more about later. But what's exciting for me is to see all of those, not just ideas, but those people combine to produce something that's sort of larger than the sum of its parts. Handmade terrazzo combined with, glass mosaic tiles, again, working with local artisans. And that translates and manifests itself in a lot of the interiors that we do. So if we're talking about workshop culture, contributing to product design, then it goes to the scale of interiors. This is a residential space that we designed a few years back. Again, working with the same artisans, craftsmen, local mosaic tile mixed with terrazzo, reclaimed old Burma teak, even down to the light switches that you can see here and the handles on the doors. So that kind of, the richness of materials is something that we're able to explore and put together. Going now to the other end of the spectrum in terms of scale, this was a residential campus. It was actually our very first project. It's called Avsara Academy. And so this was a school, an NGO school for young women with a focus in leadership and social entrepreneurialism. And the mandate that was given to us by the founder of the school, a woman named 𝗕𝗿𝗄𝗆𝗿, the mandate was to create a sanctuary for learning. This was the first time living away from home for almost all of these young women. And so we wanted to create a space that by default was an institution, but we wanted to make sure that it didn't feel institutional. And so what we tried to do is to create a greater number of smaller buildings. These are 3 of the 6. Later on, there were 2 more that were added here. We'll see the plan in a few minutes. And one of the very first things that we had to do in sort of imagining and developing the campus was to make sure that we secured our water resources. This is a part of India, in Pune. It's kind of on a high plateau. It gets a very intense monsoon for 4 months, but then no rain for the other 8. And so one of the first things that we did was establish a well on the site in order to make sure that we were, as to the extent possible, that we were water independent. We could last throughout the year, and part of the process of doing that was to ensure that we had irrigation for the landscape. And so what we developed on the site was, you can see, sorry, this will take a second to load, but you can see here these rectangular tanks. These are reed bed filtration tanks. And so all of those water channels that you saw in the previous image that run along the perimeter, that cut across here like this, those are irrigation channels that are fed by the water that goes down the drains on the campus itself. So the well, which exists here, is our source of potable water that's used for washing hands, showers, toilets, things like that. And when that water goes down the drain, it is then passed into these reed bed filtration tanks here. They're filtered by the roots of a series of specially selected plants. That then travels to a final polishing pond. Obviously, there's a few sand and charcoal filters in between. And then that water, because of the slope that we have, if you remember the first slide, that water is then pumped up to the top of the hill and filters down, so that 100% of the water that's used to irrigate the landscape comes from the water that goes down the drain. So this is a gray and black water filtration system, and enables us to not waste potable water on irrigating the landscape. This is a photograph in the process of building. You can see here the fourth building under construction. There are two more uphill. This project was more or less finished just before the pandemic. Unfortunately, it's been, like everything else here, it's been slow to sort of restart. But the students are back on campus now, and things are picking up. It's been an incredible experience for us as well to kind of create a space for the purposes of a school, especially for young women. These girls are kind of the life of the space, and they do an incredible job of kind of inhabiting it with an amazing spirit and enthusiasm. As I mentioned, it was the first time living away from home for most of them. So one of the things we tried to focus on were ways to, while it was on an extremely tight budget, we tried to focus on ways to make it more habitable, comfortable through the choices of materials, finishes, colors, things like that. We also focused, as I mentioned before, a greater number of smaller buildings. We focused on having the buildings sort of separated from each other so that you could create smaller clusters of dormitories. Each of the 6 buildings has academic functions on the ground floor and first floor, and then the second and third floor are for residences. And what that does is enables the girls to kind of live together in smaller and smaller groups. We know that those bonds, from examples that we've seen and research that we did prior to the project, we know that those bonds generally are lifelong. And so we wanted to kind of put them into sort of smaller, more nurturing environments. The other thing that we focused on was the idea of, again, looking at examples of local vernacular architecture, but the idea of verandas and courtyards and single loaded corridors to try and provide, you can see here, so this is basically the south-facing facade where we've introduced a veranda. And what that does is that it prevents the served spaces, the classrooms here, from ever getting the harsh glare of solar radiation. And so even the orientation, the placement of certain buildings, the placement of rooms within buildings, all of that was carefully curated. Along with the kind of the physical infrastructure, we worked very closely again with local artisans. In this case, masons, who, if you recognize, this is a photograph of the steps to the Acropolis by a Greek architect named 𝗙. And I use this as a reference image to discuss with our mason, the person that I've worked with for many years. And we were talking and trying to figure out what kind of paving can we use, what kind of flooring can we use. And what we very quickly arrived at was this notion of salvage. of getting things from quarries, getting things from stone shops, offcuts, broken pieces, things that weren't really usable or sellable by other people for the purposes of construction, and to use those in a way where we could create this incredible mosaic at a fraction of the cost. So we were able to get the material basically for the cost of transport, and by investing a little bit more in the craftsmanship and the labor to sort of make use out of these, we were able to create something very unique and beautiful out of that. We worked hand in hand with his team. There are no drawings that exist for this. This was all done conversationally. It was all done by literally placing the stones ourselves, trying to demonstrate how we imagine those patterns to be, working with them to figure out how they imagined it to be, things that they might have referenced from their childhood, from the spaces that they inhabit now, and to create these kind of very organic, fluid, but quite simple at the end of the day, and beautiful patterns out of the paving. Similarly, we worked with reclaimed materials in the interiors as well. We realized quite quickly that the cost of timber doors would be out of the question if we were to build them new. And we looked into metal doors, aluminum, composite, synthetic materials, things like that, which were the cheapest options. But in that research, we found that we could actually also get reclaimed doors in old Burma teakwood from abandoned buildings that had long been demolished. And in the salvage market, you're able to get a lot of these pieces. So if we were, as a studio, as a design team, willing to spend the extra effort to kind of curate, place, arrange, find patterns that worked for all of these pieces, we could have these beautifully made old wooden doors that already had this richness, this materiality, this character. We knew that they were durable because most of them were from buildings that were 50 to 80 years old. And it would fit within the budget and give these young women a kind of a very rich material palette. Similarly, we found as well that for furniture, we were asked to have plywood or particle board kind of cubbies and cabinets, lockers, things like that for the young women. And we realized that the cost of marble slabs was actually less expensive than plywood. And the cost of building those into the wall would not only save us space, but it would be longer lasting, more durable, more hygienic, all of those kinds of things. And so we started developing these mock-ups where you have these marble cubbies and coordination with the doors, and then these long linear fly ash bricks as well. The bricks also are recycled fly ash. So it's a sort of expanded aerated cement product, but a lot of the material comes from the fly ash from industrial waste. We've paired that with, as I mentioned, the local marble. This is a table we made in glass mosaic terrazzo. So it's recycled bottles, broken bottles from, beer, wine, gin, alcohol, just placed into a cement slurry and then polished into a sort of rich, colorful surface. So a lot of the material research and dialogue with the artisans and craftsmen as we're going through the design and construction process. Another really important feature for the school is the idea of passive cooling. We worked with an amazing engineer based out of New York, working for a company called TransSolar, who also has offices in Europe. And they had been working on several projects before with this idea of solar chimneys. It's not a new technology, but it's something that requires a fair amount of knowledge to implement successfully and modeling and testing. But effectively what we created was just by taking the central wall. So if you remember the image before of the verandas here on the right, and in that central wall that divides the verandas from the classrooms or the dormitories from each other, if we were to just create a separation within that creates a vertical shaft in between these spaces, we're able to exhaust hot air out at the ceiling level of each of the dormitories and each of the classrooms. And by placing sort of a greenhouse or a glass enclosure on the rooftop on 3 sides of a vertical concrete wall, what happens is that the solar radiation heats up that space, which creates a convection, which pulls that air out. It sort of drags that air out from the ceiling level of each of the classrooms. And in parallel with that, because Pune has a fairly considerable temperature variation between day and night, it's a reasonably dry climate because it's set in from the sea, unlike Mumbai. By placing in the foundations of the building these earth ducts, these massive concrete fume pipes, we are able to bring in cool air from the north side of the facade, where we have planting, vegetation, a little bit of humidity from the watering of the plants, and able to bring that in, further cool it as it passes through the foundations of the building, and then bring that in at the floor level of each of the classrooms. That's supplemented obviously by the ability to open the windows and bring in fresh air from those spaces. But this system, which requires literally no mechanical intervention at all, there's not even an exhaust fan in this chimney. We have very simple ceiling fans in the classrooms, but none of those those are just to provide comfort to the inhabitants. They're not a part of the passive cooling system at all. So you can see the solar chimney here on the top. This is a water tank that's painted in yellow. And again, just keeping everything to the bare minimum of, exposed electrical conduits, very simple mosaic floors. We tried to sort of focus on a very minimal material palette, but one that would have some sense of familiarity to the young women and would kind of provide a sort of local identity, not just to the dorms, but to the classrooms as well. I'd mentioned the broken mosaic paving. We took that idea into the classrooms as well. India has a very, very rich sort of diverse palette of marbles that are available. So different kinds of marble and different colors of marble from different parts of North India, South India, all over Rajasthan. So a lot of these colors are named for where they're from. Jessamine yellow, Udaipur green, things like that. And again, taking those materials, working with the artisans who would be laying them, but also with Dwani from our team and Malena, the color artist I mentioned, we were able to create sort of unique palettes that gave a kind of, as I said, a kind of identity or a graphic identity to the various spaces, so that girls could say, oh, I'm in the pink room, or my math class is in the green room, or I have art in the blue and yellow space. And so the flooring paired with the ceiling that you see above is something that we was a very, very deep collaboration with Malena, who I'll come to in a second here. So this is Malena. As I mentioned, she's a color artist, or a visual artist from Copenhagen. She's also an old friend at this point. And what was so special about her kind of energy and enthusiasm was that she very, very deeply engaged with everyone who was involved in her part of the project. She worked with the teams that would be painting it to develop these custom, it's kind of not even fair to call them paints. It's a mixture of pigment, which you can see here on the left, just from pigment from local markets, mixed with water, mixed with binder, it's called 𝗕𝗿𝗁, but like a polyvinyl acetate, and like a cement slurry in order to give it kind of a thickness. So the color itself, it's not quite a plaster, but it's not as thin as a paint. And so it gives a kind of abstraction of the surface that it's being applied to. At the same time, you can still see the folds in where the concrete slabs were poured. And her idea, again, was to focus the energy of the color onto the ceilings. She felt that the kind of simplicity and the richness of the horizontal blocks had a kind of character of their own. Obviously, the floors had their character with the different types of stone. And so she set about working out this palette for the ceilings. And this was her idea, obviously, but in collaboration with us as we kind of talked through how the school would operate and the girls would engage with it. And so she very quickly set about developing these materials. And again, it's a very, very long and careful process, but one that is, for us, was very much filled with joy and discovery as she worked through these different colors and these different materials, and then figured out how to curate where and how each of them would be arranged in place. I'd mentioned the broken mosaic before. That was a table. So this is a sample of that. So from this waste material of green and blue and clear and brown and purple glass, we were able to create this very beautiful, simple surface out of this material. And for us, part of what's powerful about that is that the girls themselves, out of their own curiosity, but also through the teachings of the school, are aware of these things, where the materials come from, how they've come about, and the value of recycling, upcycling, downcycling, reuse of these kinds of things, and integrating that into the not just the habitable, usable spaces, but into the kind of the mantra of the school itself. So some of them were quite small. This is one of the larger tables. And you can see here as well, again, these very simple marble shelves. And then this is one of the exhaust grills for the solar chimney. So the way that all of those things are integrated, how they come together, for us was quite a powerful experience. With Pratik, part of the idea and part of the design integration was to produce a series of solar screens to help mitigate the amount of direct sunlight that you would get. Obviously, places of privacy, protection from the sun, protection from the rain. So these screens vary in density. And again, this was a collaborative design process. These were sample studies that we made as small models in our studio. We very quickly started working with artisans and looking at those, and these are literally made at his home, one of the craftsmen that we work with, and then how you can see how that translates and becomes a part of the facade. So these are, again, everywhere from privacy, protection, rain screen, sunscreen, and then obviously some amount of graphic interplay in terms of how they're arranged and placed. But we wanted to try and use them as a way to not diminish, but maybe soften the severity of this very heavy concrete structure, which was to some degree was driven by the budget, but we wanted to create something that was just as simple and functional as possible with the structure, and then to try and find a way to inhabit that in a way that kind of softened its experience. The next project is a collection of guest houses that we've done in Zanzibar. Zanzibar is an island off the coast of Tanzania in East Africa. And one of the unique things about it is it has a very interesting geology. It's basically all formed, the entire island is formed from calcified coral limestone. And this is the site here itself where these small shrubs are on top. You can see from the section that this is, maybe a 3.5 meter, actually no, about a 4.5 meter kind of cliff that's undercut and cantilevered from the force of the ocean. At low tide, the experience is very much like this, where the water recedes out. These are sort of tide pools with everything from octopus and sea urchins and things like that. But at high tide, the water comes all the way up to the underside of this cliff. And this was the site as we inhabited it. It has almost no soil whatsoever. These are very kind of hardy plants and shrubs, things that are growing pretty much out of the rock itself. And so one of the very first things we did, we were fortunate enough to meet this gentleman and his wife, this is Franco, and his wife Bernadette run a company in Zanzibar called the Permaculture Design Company. And this is the client Shehab. And so what we did, one of the first interventions we made was to actually build a nursery on site. Part of the program of these guest houses that operate something between a kind of, it's sort of a small eco resort. But one of the things that they wanted to do was to have a kind of farm to table dining experience and to have a very lush landscape to whatever extent possible as well. And so trying to create that in a place where very little of consequence grows, we had to almost literally grow our own soil. So working with Franco, we developed a system of composting, of creating things that would grow and create biomass that we could then cut down to create this compost, vermiculture, all those different kinds of permaculture practices. We also worked with a landscape architect from New Zealand named Andy Hamilton. I've worked with him on a number of projects. And this is kind of the master plan of the whole project. We have the productive garden here in the back, some kind of functional staff services. These are, this is the nursery here on the side. And then all of these spaces here in the middle are the guest houses. In the first phase, we built 9 rooms along with the swimming pool, the restaurant, all of those things. And these first 9 rooms are up and operational. Unfortunately, just as they were about to open, the pandemic hit. So it's really now picking up steam again. We're actually going there in a few days to visit, and we actually have a couple of other projects there as well. But in the process of design, again, we worked with people in our studio. This is 𝗔𝗦𝗔 who was, building these trees and working on the landscape. We built physical models at a very large scale, not just to explore design ideas, although certainly for that. But what we found through years of practicing here is that in places where the building culture relies more on tacit knowledge, verbal communication, drawings are not the most effective way to demonstrate the ideas and the specifications of what needs to be constructed. So physical models for us become very useful, again, not just for our own design exploration, but for the clients to understand what we're talking about, and especially for the builders. And so each of these models, you can see these lines here, each of these models comes apart. We took them to site, we put them, on the ground or on the table. We sat around, we engaged with the different people who would be involved in various phases of construction. And we worked with them to develop the best practices. This is a different scale model, much smaller, obviously, but showing some of the different materials. The cladding that you see here is, again, this same local coral limestone. It comes in 2 different colors. You can kind of see this white, beigey cream color here in the foreground, and then this very beautiful kind of orangish, pinkish coral color. And we, again, tried to very, very dramatically simplify the construction. So very simple column and beam and slab structures. We used exposed board form concrete for the finishing. This is the team that we were working with. And again, a huge part of our success is often from our commitment to communication and dialogue. This is Simone Picano, who is an amazing architect who had worked with us. He's originally from Italy, but he'd worked with us for about a year before moving to Zanzibar, and he stayed on site throughout the entire construction process. Zanzibar looks like a beautiful tropical paradise, and it is, but it's also, in terms of construction, has its challenges. So he was quite a star in making this project come to life. Again, very, very simple finishes, trying to combine local knowledge, skill, craft, the resources that we brought from our experience here in Mumbai, engaging with local metal fabricators, obviously the skill and craft of the stonemasons, trying to simplify the concrete work as much as possible so that it was well within the skill set of the team that would be constructing it. And you can start to see here how from a site that had literally no trees whatsoever, working with Franco and Bernadette to bring in local species, things that would grow in this climate, in this environment, and would exist as a kind of holistic approach to inhabiting space. Some of the interiors, we worked with a local team of carpenters as well, a gentleman by the name of Stefan from Skansa. Some of the furniture pieces we made ourselves in India and brought over. So it was kind of a collaboration. We were fortunate again to be able to work with Milena. She loves this photograph because the image here on the right, the first sample room was one where I made all of the choices and specifications, and she always teases me for, I'm the boring architect who always chooses gray. So when she came on board after this room was done, she immediately brought the space to life with color and the different kind of plasters. So she started her process of exploration. That's her in the nursery, making all of these samples, creating a palette. You know, the palette in the color, the light, the air, the atmosphere in Zanzibar is very different than it is in India. And so creating a palette that was more appropriate to the local context, these much more muted tones, the reflection of light off of the ocean, the kind of beautiful blues and greens that you see from the ocean, the colors of the flowers in the landscape, things like that. And so she created this this palette for all of the different rooms. And then again, working with local craftsmen, we sort of did these interior finished plasters. Each of the rooms has a different palette based on the client wanted to engage a different, I'll say, curator or designer for each of the spaces. So each one has a very different character, and those people were able to choose their finishes. Our role was to help them coordinate that, and Milena, Simona, and I, and Erica each got our own rooms to kind of decorate. But what was nice in Milena's work was that people could choose from that palette, and then they could each have their own kind of different space in each of the rooms and has its own unique character. One of the other things that we did was bring in 2 masons from India. The local masons work very well with the coral limestone, but because we needed to use a kind of more smooth material for certain finishes, some flooring, some for the swimming pool as well, we brought in 2 masons, came with us from India, and there was this incredible engagement between Simona's Italian. There's quite a few people on the island who also speak Italian. So there was Italian, there was Swahili, there was Marathi, sorry, not Marathi, Marwari, there was Hindi, obviously a bit of English, a bit of Arabic. There was this incredible kind of diversity within the site, and people with different backgrounds, experiences, but all coming together for this common purpose to create this this environment that could be shared with guests. This was the development of the pool. That's Milena and Simona there. Again, the sort of 2 different colors of the coral as the project unfolded. You can see again that this is basically the ground as it was, and as the landscape, sorry, I'll go back a bit here, but as the landscape started to grow, it just kind of exploded. The magic that Franco and Bernadette unleashed on this space was truly incredible. which brings me to their project. So through the course of 𝗕𝗍𝗄𝗄, working with Franco and Bernadette was just incredible. And as the project was winding down, they came to us and asked if we would be able or interested to develop a sustainably designed, completely off the grid home for them on a small piece of land that they had not far from where they were working. And so we sort of titled this project A House to Collect Water. Unlike India, Zanzibar gets a more continuous rainfall throughout the year. And so the possibility of rainwater harvesting is much more viable than it is here. The issue in India becomes storage for the 8 months that where there's no rainfall. But when we looked at the kind of weather chart and rainfall map of Zanzibar, it's far more spread out. And so we quickly realized that this idea of building a house that would essentially act as a funnel to collect water that could be stored beneath the house in the cistern was something quite interesting and viable for their habitation. We, of course, looked at local examples of vernacular again, the local villages, both in materials for construction, but also in typology. The idea of, this is called the barasa, which is just a very simple kind of plinth, often integrated into the front porch as a place to sit and engage with people who are passing by on the street or neighbors, things like that. And then again, the idea of the courtyard as a way to protect an inner space, to control a bit of the landscape, to have air and light from within the house, not just from the exterior. And again, for us as a place to kind of collect and harvest and ultimately store that water that was so vital to the existence. So this is the plan of the space. The sea, if you remember the first layout, the sea is here on top at a bit of a distance. You enter the house from here. They're both trained chefs, interestingly enough, as well as being amazing gardeners and permaculturists. So cooking for them, and not just the practicality of cooking, but the social aspect, the familial aspect of cooking was something important. So there's a sort of very generous kitchen here, a dining space, a guest room here, a master bedroom here on the seaside, and then another guest room here. They're incredibly social people, in addition to their own family that they have that comes to visit. They also have guests very regularly. And then the idea too, to have these kind of veranda spaces in between that are covered, but they're open to the elements, to the outside. And so this was the plan that we had developed. Again, translating that to physical models, again, was important, not just for our own exploration, but to be able to share these ideas with them and the people who would eventually be building it. This is a little bit of this was from a few months ago, sort of the start of the excavations. I mentioned the idea of the cistern as a way to collect and store this water in the months in between the rainfall. And one of the things that became really important, not just for the current state of construction in 2022, but also as climate change advances, as sea levels rise, we wanted to make sure that we had some amount of buffer in between the level of the ocean and the bottom of our cistern. So what we did, you can see these gentlemen here taking measurements of sea level as it is at the coast. And then what we did also in the back, a little bit behind this photograph, but we dug a deep well, or a deep excavation, to be able to measure at high tide, on a full moon, what was the level of the saline water that was coming in to the site. And then from that, we could chart and figure out our section profile so that we could ensure that if the sea was over here and as it continues to rise, that it does not impact this underground cistern, which is really the heart and soul of making this project viable. obviously the roofs slope to the center. All of the water, we very carefully calibrated the amount of water that would be collected from rainfall against the square footage of surface area of the roof. That then gets collected into a pond or a water body in the central courtyard. That then goes through a very simple filtration process and gets stored in the cistern. Then from there, it gets, with a solar pump, it gets pumped to a water tower, and then it's gravity fed back into the house for daily use. They've also, through their own practices, wanted to implement a reed bed filtration system. So the septic is also reed bed filtration that then goes also to irrigate some of their landscape, obviously not at the scale of the school, but for their purposes, it was certainly enough to sort of manage the garden that they hope to have. And then we started to also look at materiality. Very early on, we wanted to see if this was a project that we could build without using cement. Cement is the #2 source of air pollution in the world, and the production of cement is. And so what we wanted to do was to find alternative means of construction. One of those is a practice that's prevalent not just in India, but also in East Africa, the idea of cow dung, or gobar as it's called here, flooring that's often mixed with clay, mixed with lime, and then is applied to the surface of the floor. One of the many advantages of that is that it's very inert. So it's quite, in hot climates where you have a lot of sunlight, this surface doesn't heat up in the same way that stone does. And there's a kind of very beautiful ritual to it. You obviously have to do it. It survives the rain, but you have to kind of top it up after each monsoon, which is something that's done here as well. And then with that, we wanted to explore the possibility. I'd mentioned that Zanzibar is made up of calcified coral limestone. Zanzibar has a very rich tradition of building with lime mortar, lime plaster, limestone blocks, obviously the masonry that we had shown at Kizikula. And so what we started to do was explore the kind of local resources that were available to build in this way. There's some UNESCO heritage buildings that are made this way, and so there is some amount of academic and practical knowledge at a kind of very high official state level, but we wanted to try and see what we could find in terms of, let's say, more informal practices as well. And so we realized quickly that this was attainable as a means of construction. There are existing lime kilns that are there in Zanzibar, and we met people who could provide this material for us. So this is a lime kiln where you can see the blocks that go in. These are then the slaking tanks where the material is sorted into rough, coarse, smooth, fine for different kinds of plaster and mortar. We also did some research on mainland Tanzania about more kind of agrarian means of production. So this is another form of a lime kiln where it's more of kind of a bonfire, if you will, where they lay the stones in between these timber sticks, and in the process of burning, that lime is slaked. We were fortunate enough, Franco and Bernadette have incredible enthusiasm for this project. So we've actually done 2 different lime kiln tests on our site, and we're exploring whether it's viable for us to slake our own lime, or whether it's more economically sustainable to simply procure it from one of the local vendors. So this was a test that we did on the site itself. If you remember, go back here, this circle, which you can see right here, is the base of the first one. This is actually the second tank. So the first one was done in this excavation here. So this is the second one, the second firing that we did, which was more successful than the first. And we're in the process now of evaluating the best way forward. This was super exciting to kind of see the photographs and video of this. Unfortunately, I wasn't there when the actual firing was done, but I'm looking forward to seeing the results. And this is the construction of the cistern. So we're seeing this now come out of the ground. We're also collaborating with a Swiss lime mason or expert in, obviously from Switzerland, and a gentleman by the name of 𝗷𝗔𝗬𝗏. And he's been very generous with his time and consulting remotely on sort of best practices and ways in which to manage the materials in the construction. So this is the foundations of the cistern below ground. You can see the proximity of the ocean. They've come up basically to ground level now. And I'm very much looking forward to going there next week and seeing how we can take this further and hopefully finish the house in the next year. Then the last project that I'll share is a small family home that we just completed outside of Mumbai. This is called Villa Uma. It was for a brother and sister and their two parents. They have a series of businesses here in Mumbai, and Alibag is a place just across the harbor on the mainland of Maharashtra. And they had a small piece of land and wanted to create a family home that they could go to on weekends and holidays and things like that to share time with each other and friends and other family as well. Again, we looked at trying to use local materials as much as possible. Maharashtra is known for its basalt, and especially in this area, basalt is an igneous rock. It's kind of black and gray in color. And so we wanted to use, again, these local materials. We also wanted to do it on a kind of as affordably as possible. So we settled quite quickly on this kind of very rough stone finish exterior. And in places where we needed to have kind of a concrete frame, it is basically a post and beam structure with a lightweight metal roof. But in places where we did need to have concrete, what we tried to do was to mitigate the amount of lost shuttering of wooden framework or shuttering for pouring concrete. We built the formwork out of brick that would be left in place and then would be dovetailed in with the stonework. And so as a way to kind of mitigate the amount of wastage within the project, we tried to use, again, the local stone. The bricks were made in a kiln not far from the site itself, and to try and build these ways, build these structures in a way that was as passive as possible. We took inspiration from a series of projects we saw in Rajasthan, projects I'll say, but local village homes that were built in a similar way. This is also interesting. So we developed a kind of very simple stone paving that came out of the wastage from, so in the process of building the large stone block walls, you end up with a lot of little chips. And so we tried to develop a system of paving where those could be utilized in the same way. Again, we worked with the local artisans, craftsmen, carpenters in this case. The gentleman that was drawing the window frame, that was for another project, but the same team built these doors and windows. And one of the things that we tried to do, if you look carefully, you can see they have these marble frames. Timber is one of the most expensive materials, not just for the material itself, but also for the labor. So one of the things we tried to do was to implement these marble frames as a way to fix the shutters. So if you have a standard window or a standard door, you have the shutter door, and then you have typically the timber frame that goes around it. That practice nearly doubles the cost of the windows. And by doing that same thing in stone, which you'll see in a minute, it cuts the cost dramatically of the carpentry and also actually makes the construction a bit more efficient. Again, working with 𝗏𝗏𝗏, this time on her own or as a part of our practice, but this is 𝗏𝗏𝗏, to develop the colors. She had worked with Milena on the colors for the school, and looking at these kind of different plaster samples, paint colors, This is called IPS, which is a different technique. It's effectively like a cement screed that has the pigments and color in it. So developing these different colors for the house based again on the landscape, on our preferences, the client's preferences, trying to integrate and create something that was a holistic environment. And then looking at how those things come together. So we did this very simple, just rough plaster and painted finish. You can see here the steel structure of the ceiling, and then the in between, it's just a very simple cement fiber board. All of that gets painted. You can see here the marble frame that I was talking about before with the wooden shutters. That marble frame continues across, forms the control joint between the IPS and the more rough plaster on the ceiling. You can see that expressed here as well. Different colors for different spaces. Living rooms, bedrooms, bathrooms. Again, you can see the marble frame here. And you can see a bit of it here. This was a shower space looking up into a skylight for one of the guest bathrooms. And then coming back, if you remember the first image, that was literally this corner where you have the brickwork here and you have the stonework here. What we wanted to do was to create a way to obviously, one, first and foremost, protect, waterproof the house. But with this very simple paint, what we just tried to do was to tone down the contrast between materials and really have them be expressed more for their texture than for their color. So we just, again, very simple coping here on the top, very, very cost-effective corrugated cement fiber roof. There's a roof terrace here. This is a water tank. But using color, again, to sort of tie those things together and have them express themselves more from the materiality, more from the texture of their materiality than from necessarily the colors, and to try and flatten that out a little bit. You can see the stone paving here in the foreground. The landscape was a really important part of this project as well. We worked with a young woman named Nazneen, who runs an amazing floral practice here in Mumbai, and Farhan from our team also collaborated to create the landscape. And one of the most important things that they wanted from the very beginning, if you remember the site plan, was this kind of very beautiful but simple pool. So we sourced granite from South India and created this, basically just a very simple rectangular tank. It sits along these existing mango trees. You can see where the people are here. There's a very simple roof terrace. And the idea with kind of the layout for the house was that each space responds to, each of the bedrooms, the living room, the dining room responds to a very different kind of view within the site or space within the context of the landscape. While it is a fairly small site, it's a 1 acre plot, we found it to be incredibly nuanced in the kind of opportunity for looking at sort of different moments within the environment of the gardens and the views to the distant hills. So that was my last slide. I would just conclude by saying that I hope what I've shown was an expression of our commitment to collaboration, not just as a way to kind of get the job done, but to also enrich the experience, not just for ourselves, but for the clients as well, to really build, I believe very strongly in kind of the idea of narrative, not just as a way to tell the story of a design, but as a way to kind of jumpstart the kind of memory of a place or something that's being created, that carries through in our products, that carries through in our interiors, and obviously with our architecture as well. And so, yeah, I thank you for this opportunity and appreciate the chance to share some of our stories with you.
Hello, Sam.
Hello.
Can you actually see me? Oh, you can.
I
Hi,
can.
good
How
to
are
see you again. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much.
Well, your project are incredible as, you know, from the beginning until, of course, all the new ones we're seeing today.
Thank you.
And yeah, I think, you know, some of the questions might be a bit practical because I think a lot of young architects are actually looking in your projects and their jaws probably are dropping right now, you know, in amazement of the commitment, the time that you are putting into all this really incredibly detailed experience for your client.
Yeah, I'm happy to take technical
Sure.
questions. Those are some of the best ones.
Talking about clients, I think your clients are probably as much of a collaborators as your craftsmen. And you, of course, in one project, you actually display that quite well, you know, that, you know, they are very involved, they are really a part of the projects. I wonder, who are your clients in all these amazing locations? How do they find you? And how much you collaborate with all of them?
Well, each one is quite different. For 𝗙𝗵𝗁, you know, they were friends of ours initially who had this great passion and vision for building a school, and it was very much, you know, in their case, they had great trust in our vision and our goals, because I think there was a kind of shared set of aspirations. You know, projects that we're doing in Zanzibar and here in India, it varies. You know, people kind of see our work, and usually we start the projects with kind of a series of very deep and long kind of conversations. With Shehab, especially in Kizikula and Zanzibar, a lot of just sort of getting to know each other, traveling a little bit around the island. And I find that any collaboration that you're doing, which I had mentioned, is there's a sort of inherent trust deficit. And so, yes, it's important that architects make drawings. It's important that they make models and think about proportions and materials. But you're also building relationships, and you're also, you know, investing in dialogue, and those a commitment to those things is really critical.
Well, collaboration talks about being bilateral, right? So as much you learn from them as they learn from you. And of course, working with different traits all the time. How much of an exchange and input, or how much does you actually side change throughout the process of this collaboration from the beginning to the end?
I think it changes a fair amount. You know, as we evolve ideas, we think about, like, Pratik Raval, who did the solar chimneys for 𝗙𝗵𝗁, is a great example. He was fantastic to work with because he kind of took our design intent. He looked at what we had done, what we had produced, sort of independent of his role in the project. And he said, okay, now how can I mold my role into this and work with what's already been created. But when he started to make suggestions, we were very amenable to the ideas that he was bringing, and adaptable in trying to figure out what was the common ground where we could kind of amplify our combined efforts. The same is true of carpenters, whether it's detailing a window or figuring out how a handle operates, things like that, all the way through, you know, bamboo screens. And what we end up doing when we do work in these remote locations is we rely a tremendous amount on you know, I'd mentioned tacit knowledge. We rely on an understanding of the kind of local, not just expertise and experience, but, you know, understanding of materials and how they come together. And so, you know, there's no way that I could understand the building technologies in Zanzibar without sort of having that input from those teams. There are universal principles, but the specifics of it become really informative and engaging.
So, I mean, definitely from the beginning of each of these projects, you have a long period of really just learning, right? From the local construction and that sort of things.
I wish it was a long period. A lot of times clients want things yesterday.
So do you still get that, the client who wants the house yesterday?
Yeah, we're starting a house now that we really began the project in January, and they want the foundations in before the rains. Every single meeting is, and the rains are coming,
right.
In the next several weeks, and so it's a very, very quick process, and sometimes you have that luxury. But what I find part of our challenge or our tricks are to create that time and that space for us, because it's essential. So how do you produce enough work to get the next person in the chain to be able to begin their process, and while they're then working, it gives you time to kind of do the research and spend the time and energy in your process without holding them up. So we have to be really clever, and we have to be really agile in understanding not just the best way to make a building, but the process through which that'll be realized, and the roles that all of these collaborators play.
Right, because my next question was actually related to that, because working on projects like this, obstacles are, expected, right? And what are some of the really crazy obstacles that you have to face, and how does the collaborations help you overcome all those different obstacles? And it doesn't have to be just, with craftsmen. It can be obstacle with clients or contractors or that sort of things.
I think that's a great question. I was fortunate enough in graduate school, I had this incredible teacher in the workshop. We had classes where we would build furniture and bicycles and all kinds of crazy things. And one of the things he said again and again and again is that in design, there's no such thing as obstacles, there's only opportunities. And so tying that then to this collaborative method that we've really, we deeply believe in, from the very beginning, trying to build those coalitions and those alliances, and having them, having this kind of shared sense of responsibility that while we will confront obstacles, whether it's, budget or local permissions or labor disputes or things like that, but trying to sort of foster a culture where we're all in that together, and that we're working as a not so much as a unit, but that there's a sort of shared sense of responsibility, and that we can sort of build that coalition. So yeah, that's kind of how we tackle it.
Right. Well, this is the question from people online, from the audience online. What was the potential or fascination of India that made you set your firm there? Like, how did you come to India?
Sure. A great question. I get that quite often. I came first as a student in 2003. I was doing my master's in Los Angeles at SciArc, and we had an opportunity to either study in Japan or to study in India, and I had already done 2 semesters abroad in Europe. I knew nothing about the place, nothing about the culture. I was very, very ignorant of all of those things, but I just sort of took a leap of faith and joined the studio with some good friends who became even better friends. And in the time that I was here, I just really fell in love with it. I struggled in the beginning, climate and food and culture and all of that, but by the time it was time to go, I had met an incredible architect, 𝗔𝗦𝗔 𝗜hy𝘁𝗲𝗿, that I ended up working for afterwards. And when my wife and I moved here in 2006, we thought we'd be here for a couple of years. So that was 16 years ago, and I've now lived in Mumbai longer than anywhere else in my life. So
oh, wow.
Our children were born here. This is home.
Wow. It's not an easy city to live in.
No.
No, right?
It's not.
But
it's not.
It seems that India, especially Mumbai, had the basic needs to set a firm like you with the craftsmen, because there's tradition even from the slums throughout to the village, right? There are incredible craftsmen everywhere. Who are some of the first what are some of the first crafts that you actually collaborate with in terms of architecture? What sort of trades you started collaboration with?
Sure. The easiest and the obvious ones are the carpenters. Yeah. And some incredible, in my time at Studio Mumbai, I was there 7 years. The team that we had, we were a design build practice of more than 200 people. And so I was working every single day. Any little bit of terrible Hindi that I know, I've learned mostly from working with these amazing people. And then, you go on to the masons and electricians and plumbers. But we've now spread out, at 𝗕𝗿𝗳 I had mentioned, we engaged with the farmers. We engaged with people who know how to make clay and terracotta. We've worked in case goods. We've worked with people who weave jute and who dye using natural pigments and things like that. So the incredible thing about India, I feel one of many, and this is, it is the reason I chose to stay and practice here, is that kind of, there are many countries in the world that have a tradition of craft, but India has it in volume, obviously with, more than 1 billion people. We're still, it's diminishing, there's no question, as construction kind of rages on and people are asked to do less and less sophisticated things faster and faster for less and less money. It's I wouldn't say dwindling yet, but it's reducing and it's constricted in the time that I've been here. But there is still a vast tradition and a lineage of, the carpenters we work with go back 60 generations. Right. Their fathers were all carpenters. And so there's something very powerful in that tradition.
Right. Well, I've been to you, sorry. If you have questions from the floor, please walk up to the microphone. Please don't be shy. And there was another question from the internet. Please put that up again. Well, I haven't been to any of your projects yet, but I've seen your work. Furniture, decorations, and even parts of architecture, right? Hardwares and that sort of thing, and they all wanted to be touched, right? I mean, it basically, I went to your studio and the handle, the brass and wood handle, you went up there and you just want to touch it, right? I mean, that sense of touch, that or wanting to touch, it's really incredible from what I've seen, throughout your architecture. Is then, when we talk about architecture, like you being very handmade and hands-on, how much do you actually use the sense of touch as part of the design? I mean, we've seen texture, right? I mean, you walk on the floor, you definitely feel different things. You talk about heat, right? You talk about the cool material and the cold material. How much is that really get considered as part of the design process?
I think it falls into maybe a larger category that I always try and think about, which is experience. Yeah. And when, touch is a huge part of experience, smell, all of these kinds of very visceral things. I do think what separates us as architects from, let's say, many of the people that I went to school with now work in the movie industry, or they work in different kinds of, whether it's graphics or other kinds of design mediums, which are all incredible. But I think the one thing that sets architecture apart is this kind of very visceral experience, mm-hmm. and how that's created with, whether it's color, whether it's texture, light, surface, touch, all of these kinds of things. For me, I feel they're very powerful. They're very, very primitive and kind of deeply rooted in us as kind of emotive beings. And so if we can create, again, objects, artifacts, spaces that are evocative and that provide those kinds of experiences, not necessarily as a, I always talk to my wife about, wanting to create an environment where our children have those kinds of experiences in spaces either that we make or that we bring them to, but without sort of hitting them over the head with it. That you have a sense of a qualitative environment, but the environment isn't the thing that's matters most. The environment is just the backdrop in which life happens. And so to try and create things that people can use or live in or experience in their daily lives as an environment to host their experiences, be they, shared with friends, a good meal, or whatever, if we can sort of contribute to that quality, we're very happy.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, of course, I haven't been there, but it seems that your architecture seems to provoke all the senses, even the smell and of course the touch. Another question from home is that, does the research about the vernacular architecture, what does the research about vernacular architecture means for you in your design approach? How long does your research take before your design process? Of course, you've said that some of the projects you don't have a lot of time, but of course, you definitely do spend a lot more time than others, many others.
Yeah, I think there are things that happen in parallel. I mean, almost from the moment we get the invitation to participate in something, I'm already thinking about what the design might be, what its potential could be, in very abstract terms. And what we try and do then is conduct research, again, not so formal, but whether it's driving around in the countryside in the environment where that's happening, or whether, in places around Mumbai where that research has been happening in the last 16 years. And of course that folds into, what we do for the next project in this context. So it's something that's, I would say, cumulative, and it's not so necessarily linear or direct how it will influence, but 𝗷𝗫, the form of those buildings is taken from running balconies that exist in Maharashtra and Pune, because those were the social spaces where people living in dense conditions would hang out. They're protected from the sun, they're protected from the rain. I didn't think one day that that's what it should be. In fact, I just kind of started thinking about, okay, what kind of spaces would these girls want to have? And then I realized, I've just copied that from, the street corner in Pune. So I think there's a lot of, 𝗔𝗦𝗔 really instilled in me and a teacher that I had in school named 𝗕𝗿𝗿 this sense of the importance of curiosity. Yeah. As designers, and any environment that we're in, whether we're aware of it or not, we're learning from it, right? Whether it's conscious or not, we're absorbing. If you can do it consciously also, and then kind of file those things away, take photographs, make sketches, whatever that means of documentation is, you never know when it will be drawn upon and how it will surface in your work.
Wow, thank you. I think I have time for just one question. And of course, it might be taboo to ask this sort of things, but I think the young professionals here are definitely curious about this. I mean, working in architecture as a firm, it's expensive, right? You get certain amount of fee, and then you have all these people that you have to work with and you have to pay. And from what it seems that your firm with collaborations, you do have to probably double the amount of collaborators than your most traditional quote unquote architecture firm. How does the fee system, and I say the system, not structure, works for you as a company? How much does, and it's not about how much it costs, but how do you actually manage so that you can get collaborations with all these different people? Of course, especially when you work abroad, right? You have two teams that you have to pay on top of that. And so how do you manage to get all this done and produce all this really incredible work, but manage to survive, as a family? I think young architects here are struggling, because even I am losing money on some of our projects, and I'm not doing as much as you.
Well, how do we manage? I would say just barely. you know, there are some projects you do because they're for friends or family. There are some projects you do because you just fall in love with the site or you fall in love with the program. You know, there are definitely projects that I've shown, you know, in the talk that we barely broke even on, or you know, house to collect water we'll lose money on. But you know, you hope that there are other forms of compensation that come about, whether it's building institutional knowledge within your own team and your own sort of personal experience, whether it's, you know, sending a message out into the world that, you know, hey, this kind of work is important and we believe in it, and therefore we're investing our own kind of energy and effort into it. And then you have to sort of balance it with other projects that might be, I don't want to say less fun or less interesting, but you still do because, you know, you can learn from those as well. We've taken on projects with corporations because I want to know, you know, all of this, what I've shown today is well and good, but can I do this at a different scale? Can I do this at the scale of, you know, a high rise? Can I do this at the scale of a factory? Can I do this at the scale? And then how do I engage with those kinds of structures where it's not you're dealing with one person, but then you're dealing with a board or sort of a group from the client side. And so we generally work on a lump sum basis, to put it in really simple terms, that we try and define what the scope is and then fix a fee for that. If that scope changes, then you have to go back and say, hey, we're owed more if you want us to do this extra work. Or but I find it's the most sort of transparent in terms of, you know, I don't like a percentage basis, because if you work with gold or you work with plastic, it's the same amount of work for us, in some ways more if it's a less sort of rich material. Right. But yeah, just try and be open and communicative, and then it's another parameter, right? Budget is a parameter that I can't change any more than I can change program or gravity or climate. So you deal with it in a way that hopefully gets you by. Okay.
Well, thank you for a very honest and very thoughtful answer. Well, thank you for joining us today. And of course, your work's always been incredible. And one of these days, when all the COVID things are a bit better, I'm going to go to Pune and then Maharashtra again. Okay. I'll see you soon.
Please come. I'm sorry I couldn't join in person.
Don't worry. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you so much for wonderful sharing, Mr. Barclay. Collaboration is really a key of craftsmanship. And also thank you, Mr. 𝗕𝗿𝗄𝗆 as our moderator. So next session will be Gloriously Repeating by Fala Atelier, presented by Lerla Samovic and Felipe Martinez. From Fala Atelier, we're answering your questions today. And also welcome Professor 𝗕𝗿𝗄𝗆𝗵, architect and founder of Research Studio 𝗕𝗿𝗄𝗆𝗵, professor at the Faculty of Architecture, St. Bacon University, as our moderator for this session.
So hello everyone, and first of all, thank you for the invitation. We are always happy to do a lecture, and I think it kind of gives us a chance to reflect a bit also on our own work. My name is Lara. I am one of the partners in Fala Atelier. We are a relatively small office from Portugal, from Porto. I think right now we are 11 or 10 people, which almost feels too big. And the office was established in 2014, so we are 8 years old. So maybe we are getting old actually. And since the theme of the series is about collaborations, we thought that we will take this opportunity and we will actually talk about clients, because for us it's a big theme, it's an important theme, and we have a lot of funny stories to tell. So yeah, we will talk about clients. We will talk about all kinds of clients, and I organized this lecture as 14 short stories. So I will try to show 14 projects, which might be too much, but then every project I will try to frame it from the perspective of the relationship with the client, what was so specific in the point, and so on. And when it comes to clients, I think some of these projects and some of these stories, they are painful, they are disappointing, they might be almost I don't know, stories of failure in a way, but also some of these stories are, let's say, joyful stories, happy stories, the stories where we are happy, the client is happy, and it all kind of worked out. But I think also for us, it's always about learning, kind of project by project. We are understanding how to navigate this reality, because of course the truth is that as a student of architecture, you never learn how to actually deal with the client, how to communicate, how to present your project, and how to build this kind of discussions. So since we are, although we are 8 years old, I think we are still learning with every new project how to manage as architects. And as an illustration of such a difficult relationship, we took the image of the performance that Joseph Beuys did with the coyote, and one could say that the client would be the coyote in that image, but I think there are always moments when we as architects ourselves become the wild animal. And so the first project is, as you can judge by the number, it's one of our early projects. I think it was almost one of the first houses that we actually did for a client who was about to live there. So the project was a single family house, and the title of the story is the story of surprising indifference, because at the time we thought that this proposal in this house was quite radical, and if you look at the plan, you can see that it doesn't look like a normal house, and the client in this case was it was a typical Portuguese family. It was a house, as we called it, for 3 generations. So it was meant to have 3 bedrooms. And as you can see on the plan, so the house is a perfect square because, of course, as architects, we enjoy squares. And then you can see that 1 bedroom is a triangle, 1 bedroom is a quarter of a circle, and 1 is a square. Then the space, kind of the leftover space, becomes this weird and complex figure, which includes the dining, the living, and the kitchen, and there are no corridors. So the relationship between the private and the public program is quite radical, which is also, I would say, an unthinkable moment for, again, a typical Portuguese family. But anyways, they saw the plan. They were okay with it, and they just said, yeah, let's go. And for us, I think it was quite a surprising moment. But I think often, as it happens, the clients, they might not understand what they're actually looking at. So I think the complexity of the space and the complexity of the house, and kind of also the radicality of this proposal was not quite comprehended. But anyway, we proceeded with the project. We were actually at the time also preoccupied very much with the with the grid and with the relationship of all the proportions in the house. So as you can see on this drawing, kind of the plan is a very precise drawing, and it's a very precise figure, and it has the only exception actually, which is the column that is kind of an offset element that is floating in space. But all of this was fine, all of this was okay, accepted, and we just proceeded with the house. And the resulting space was actually quite open, and it was not a house-like space, one could say. So you see the living room on this image. You see also that the palette of materials is quite modest in a way, and it was also something that was kind of inspired by the client, let's say, because they always want to kind of tone down all the ideas and all the proposals that are much more bright and radical at the time, but still you can see a few details. You can see that the direction of the wooden pavement is following kind of the rotation, and it's kind of circulating around the column. You see that the doors are kind of emphasized as an important element, but then the rest, so the walls and the ceiling, they kind of become the white base and the white background, and they yeah, in a way they are kind of trying to emphasize the figure of the open public space of the house. And then the outside appearance of the project is also, I would say, a separate story, because as you can see, the house looks quite different from its neighbors, and I think this was also one of the funny moments. All the neighbors in the village, of course, were not so excited about the house. For them, this house didn't look like a house. And if you look at the elevation, it is actually quite simple and straightforward. Every side kind of is almost repeated, or every side is conceived by using the same elements. You see the same door, the same square window, and the same round window. And then the house is kind of covered with a very simple sloped roof, and then the chimney on top kind of finishes the volume. And I think the last touch in this chapter was the fact that the project also took quite a long time, but then now the clients finally moved in, and I think when we saw this house actually populated with furniture, we understood that the complexity of the project, or the kind of the strange typology that we proposed, was never it was never understood. The house is actually lived and occupied in a very, in a very normal and almost traditional manner, and I think that was still kind of a bit of a mismatch for us, because we would imagine that such a project would would challenge the way you live in a house, and it would kind of somehow challenge also the way you occupy the space. But then the square plan was just populated with the TV, with the sofa, and with the regular furniture, and it it became kind of a strange house that is populated with let's say with the traditional furniture and the most banal objects. And then the second project is also a house, and this chapter is called "A House That Looks Like a House," because it was a specific demand from the clients. And again, you can see that the project happened much later from the first one, but I think it tackles a lot of the same themes, and it is also quite similar in scale and the program. It is also one of those houses that stands in the suburbs. You can see that the plan is again a square, because we, at the time I guess we could only imagine a plan that is a square somehow. But you see that in this case, the relationship between the public and the private is quite different. So the living room below is just kind of a simple rectangular space, and then there is a cut, and then there is a very kind of a very complex set of small spaces. You see a lot of kinks. You see a lot of kind of imperfections in terms of its geometry, but then again, all of those was kind of done to respect the complexity of the program, and to make kind of all the rooms and all the requirements meet. And also, if you look at the plan, you see that there are actually two circulation spaces, so two hallways that become a buffer between the living space and the bedroom, and from those hallways you kind of navigate into your room, or into a bathroom, a storage, and so on. Once again, we were quite interested in how the geometry of the plan is conceived, and in this case, I think it was also something that we discussed with the client, because although the plan might seem chaotic, let's say, I think it is something that they like to see. So the fact that there is actually kind of a layer of order behind kind of all of those moments. And since the client asked for a house that looks like a house, the first question from our side was, okay, but what does it mean for you? And the answer was actually quite fast and straightforward. For them, the house was kind of the idea of the house came with the notion of having a sloped roof. So in case of this project, the sloped roof became kind of a defining element for the volume. And as you can see, kind of in this faraway photo, the roof becomes kind of, it dominates one side of the house, and the outside volume in this case becomes a bit more complex maybe than in the previous house, because every elevation actually has an impact from this roof. And if from one side you kind of almost only see the roof, then from the entrance you see a white wall, you see the big window, you see the beam that is kind of holding the roof. So in case of this project, the building has 4 faces, and all of those faces are somehow defined by the slope of the roof, and then defined by a series of a few added elements. You see, for instance, the big blue chimney that is actually overlaid with the window. You see the big blue door that is kind of marking the entrance. You see the beam above the main elevation, so the elevation that you see as you approach the house. And then a few smaller moments. So there is a round window, there are 2 columns, and then you can also see a small base of the house to elevate the volume. So this project for us, I think, was an attempt to get a bit closer to a traditional Portuguese house, but then to still do an iteration on that. And then from the inside, the space I would say is also quite defined by the roof. You see that the living room, for instance, has the beams exposed. And then you see also a few colorful elements, and in that case it was also the same story of the client asking you to actually make the color much more bright somehow, so much less saturated. And I think every client in our practice would rather go for, I don't know, white, gray, or beige. But in this case, again, we managed to go from, let's say, from a bright blue or a dark blue to, although a much softer version of it, but we still managed to maintain the color, and for us it was a small victory at the time. So in this case, I think we quite enjoyed working with the clients much more closer. So they were involved in the project. They were they were interested in many small moments, because usually the clients would be just excited about kitchens and bathrooms, but in this case I think they were trying to understand every aspect of it, and they were also navigating with us, but they were open-minded enough to allow a few experiments to happen within this universe of this particular project. Project number 79, and this one is the story of the shortcut. This one is let's say is a particularly sad and painful story for us, maybe. It is also a single family house. In this case, the project is located in the city center. So unlike the previous 2 projects I showed, this one has just two facades or 2 faces, because it is actually standing in between other building. And in this case, the the idea is quite, I would say, is quite simple, and it also has to do with the client, because he wanted a house that he would understand. So any kind of experimentation with, let's say, crazy geometries was ruled out right away. And if we look at this comprehensive drawing, I would say that the house can almost be summarized by a few elements. So you see that there is this one column that is going through every level, and it becomes the main element. It becomes the main device that is holding the house together. And then the plan is a simple rectangle, and the two facades, they are kind of becoming the masks that are framing the composition. And this column for us was indeed the kind of the heart of the house, and it was a non-structural element, but it was, let's say, the kind of the symbolical center of the house. And the column was also done in a way that it is a point where the four walls meet, where the four doors arrive. So the outline of the concrete column was actually designed very carefully to make the doors meet. And in a way, it was the only, let's say, it was the only kind of exception in the house. It was the only kind of formal moment. And even if you see the kind of, we had to produce those very specific metal profiles to then pour the concrete on the inside. And the column, as I said, is the anchor point of the house. So you see that kind of on the ground floor, it is just a floating element because once again, it is a living space which we want to keep open. But then on the upper levels, it becomes the point of intersection. So the four spaces are the circulation space, the bathroom, and the two bedrooms. And then you see that kind of if you remove the column, the organization of the plan is, it's a rectangle divided into four parts, but then kind of as you zoom in on the point, it becomes an important moment. And then since the column was not a structural element, and it was kind of, as I said, rather a symbolical device in the house, we decided to actually make this column float. So on the ground floor, it was not touching the ground. I think it was floating about 60 centimeters above from the ground. And it was also, I think, the right thing to do for the living room because it was kind of a small mysterious moment, and it kind of maintains the openness of the space. But as I said, it was a sad story. It was a sad project because the client was always questioning this column, and it was discussed a lot. It was he got questions about why is it kind of an exposed concrete? Why isn't it touching the floor? Why this? Why that? So it was always a question. But I think throughout the project we discussed it a lot, and we managed to to explain the idea behind it, and it seemed like he was on board. But then when the project was finished, one day, I think we didn't even know that it was about to happen, but we got a phone call and they said that they demolished the column. So this column now only exists on the upper levels, and on the upper levels and on those photos. So that was, I mean, the project is still there, it's all there, but the only part of it is missing, which is of course a very disappointing moment for us, but I guess also kind of a lesson to learn here. But anyways. The next house, I will show it quite briefly because this chapter is rather kind of a preface to the chapter after it. And this one is about stubbornness and persistence. This was a house for an old couple. It was a renovation, and as you see, it's one of those typical Portuguese houses, and it's a small one, and it was a project that took a long time, and it was a client that was probably the most persistent and the most stubborn of them all. He was on the construction site every day. He was calling us every day. He was demolishing walls by himself. It was quite a struggle, but now that it's over, I think we can laugh about it. But the project somehow was, it was controlled a lot by the client. It was difficult for us to navigate, to propose things. So although maybe we are not as excited about it, but then I think again we learned to pick our fights, let's say, or to find kind of small moments of joy within a very limited frame of actions. And the plan of the project is quite simple. As I said, we are not as excited about it. You see that on the ground floor, it's basically a garage and one open space, and then on the upper floor, it's well, it's a hallway and it's a number of rooms. One of the challenges for us was to design a new back facade, which would be modest and kind of clear and understandable, but then to still kind of find the logic within it, find kind of the right proportions and the right set of materials. And you see that this facade is quite simple, quite straightforward. It's a window, it's a marble panel, a balcony, and kind of one black element on top that emphasizes this break between the glass and the marble. And one of the jokes that we have about this house, I was saying that the client was always there, and if you can see on the photo, the figure of the client is still here, and I think he was even there on the day of the photo shoot to make sure that things can still go his way. But then again, yeah, if we would summarize the project, I think we would remove some parts of it. So we did them, but we are not as excited about it, let's say. And for us, the project could be summed up as this great circulation space at the entrance with the dome-like ceiling. Then it would also be this moment of introducing, let's say, the skeleton of the house with the staircase and the set of cabinets. And well, there is a column in the living room, but then also I think there is this facade that is quite simple, but then quite precise and quite definite. So once again, kind of a very difficult exercise to navigate within a difficult client. But I think this one was about learning kind of how to find those those joyful moments within a project that seems, I don't know, very hard and very impossible. And I showed it because the next project was actually from the son of the client. So I think the notion of getting new clients from there are families of projects that we already completed. I think that actually maybe it proves that the previous project was not as disastrous as we thought. But yeah, the next chapter is about making it great. So the son of the client, they also asked for a house. It was once again a house in the suburbs of Porto, and you know, the same program: living room, 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, and so on. So in a way, we are, I think, already becoming masters of such typology, because yeah, single family house is probably the most popular or the most common commission that we are getting. And in this case, I think there was no special requests. The site was maybe a bit difficult, but they just asked for a house. And I think now that it's built, I think one of the criticisms that we're getting is that once again it is not quite accepted by the neighbors. They are calling it a church or a shopping mall or a gallery. So we managed to do a house once again that doesn't quite look like a house. But I think we are also interested in in challenging the typology, so in running away from all the traditional notions and aspects of the house that are expected. And in this case, so it's a freestanding house in the plot. And I think one of the challenges in this project that we wanted to to embrace or to explore was to learn to work with the volume. And you see that the volume of this house is quite well, it's not extremely complex, but then again it has a few parts and moments. You see that the main volume of the house is this kind of curved figure with the sloped ceiling. Then there's a small tower, then there's a big triangle that is a chimney. And color actually plays an important role here, because as you can read from the image, kind of every corner of the house kind of is a place where the surfaces of different color meet. So for us, it was an exercise of of learning how to actually design a volume, and how to navigate the materiality of the very same volume. As I said, the title of this story is Make It Gray, and this project was indeed a lot about kind of turning down all the colors, removing kind of elements of the project and so on. And I'm showing those two images of the interior space because the image on the left was meant to be the original image. So you see that kind of the stepped wall of the living room is kind of emphasized with the black line of MDF, and then the dot on the other side. So there is a certain kind of level of complexity and of embracing the the geometry of the space. But this was kind of the specific moment that the clients were not so comfortable with. So at some point we had to make this image where everything is white. And you see the same kind of, there is always a bit of a mismatch, I would say, between the collage that we propose, so the idea of the project, and then in the reality, it has to have some concessions and some compromises. And in this case also, I think it's important to talk about the volume of the house, the concept of the space and so on. So I was saying that the site was a bit complicated, and the site was actually imposing the curved wall that you can see on this drawing. So it was following somehow the outline of the plot. And then this curve becomes the defining element of the living space. And then you see the blue part, that is the very organized and the repetitive set of programs. And the division of in this house between the private and public becomes quite evident. And once again, the public space, the living space, becomes quite so it results from the intersection of those two geometries. The living room has a very weird shape. It has a curved wall on one side, it has the stepped surface on the other side. So, and then it has a sloped ceiling. So it produces a space that is quite spectacular, one would say. And it also has a quite high ceiling. But this project was the case when I think the clients, they didn't really understand what they were getting. They were okay with it, but I think for them it's okay, it's just a room, and the complexity and the trying to highlight this room or trying to make this room special, it didn't quite matter. And as you can see, although we still managed to maintain those corner elements, you see that so they were meant to be, I think they were meant to be black marble, then they were meant to be just black MDF, and then they ended up to be this kind of stripe of dark wood, which I think was a good enough compromise for us, because I think it would be a pity if the space actually was fully white, but at least we managed to do that. So also the outside volume has, I think at some point was at risk of becoming, because in this case the color was so important for us, and there was a brief moment in time when I think clients were actually questioning if we need any color at all, but we managed to do it. And once again, we managed to build a house that does not look like a house, but this, I think, was always kind of a goal for us. And now from single family houses to housing. So in this case, it's a story of complete rejection. It was a project in not suburbs of Porto, but rather a small town half an hour away. But also you see the context, and you see that it's kind of a private houses kind of situation. the project in this case was not for someone to live in there right away. It was it was an investor project, so they were building apartments to sell, and there were many kind of moments in this project that were defined from the very beginning. So there were certain areas that we had to follow. We knew that we would have 5 apartments and so on and so forth. And I think often when you are working with the investor type of client, you are supposed to deliver a certain number of square meters, and I think they also are mostly interested in square meters, and they're interested for it to be very sellable. And in this case, the project was, I think, going quite okay in the beginning, and I think it often happens due to the fact that clients, I mean, sometimes they maybe don't quite know how to read drawings or images, and I think often they agree to things that they don't quite understand, maybe. And in this case, the project was it was literally a box. It was actually a distorted box due to kind of some distortions in the plan, and one of the goals here was to make this, because it was almost meant to be this kind of townhouse typology, so 5 separate houses, but we wanted to make these houses one single building, and we ended up with a building that is kind of wrapped in these in these layers and these patterns of doors, windows, marble elements, cornices, and so on. So the project, you see that the outline of the plan is a bit kinked. You see kind of the division of the inside space, and you see that the facade is kind of the same theme that goes around the building, and kind of a few exceptions are introduced when needed. The 5 apartments are quite diverse, I would say. Kind of there are a few logics that are going throughout the building. So one of them is the module of the bedroom that you can see on the upper level, which is then repeated on the ground floor. Then you see a line of columns, and then in a pink layer there is a set of exceptions, and the exceptions actually happening when we are introducing either a storage room or the bathroom or something of that kind. So although these are 5 apartments that are more or less of the same scale, the result is that these apartments are actually quite different and quite diverse in terms of how the space is actually unfolded in each one of them. And it was very much a project about rules and exceptions. So you see that in a blue line, kind of a few grids are overlaid, a few kinks and breaks are then introduced, and then the facade is kind of this even pattern, or this kind of even stripe of dots, triangles, and windows that is kind of wrapped around this distorted box. And then the interior space, although there's always kind of a bit of a difference because of those moments of exceptions, it still follows kind of a very precise logic. There is always a column, there is always the same palette of materials, there is an occasional skylight, and so on. So although 5 apartments are quite different, they are still kind of maintaining this continuity, because of the set of materials and elements that are participating in it. The material palette in this project was also something that we kind of had to adjust, because I think the kind of the proposals that we made in the beginning, they were of course once again much more radical than what we see here. But at the same time, I think we are quite happy with the outcome, because we need to embrace and we need to understand how to operate within a very, let's say, precise and kind of banal in a good way set of materials. So I think kind of part of the challenge for us was always to abandon all the, I don't know, stripes, colors, and patterns, and to learn how to navigate within kind of a very calm set of colors. And 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 why the story of complete rejection? Because I think when the project started to be built, so I think that there was no concern about the inside space, but there was rather the concern about the facade. So all the dots and triangles of marble were always in question, and I think the client also had an expectation of a facade that would, let's say, that would resemble the houses that are around it. And I think at some point the real estate agent showed up and was also saying that it would be extremely difficult to sell it, but the project remains as it is, and nothing, fortunately, nothing was cut off or removed or anything, but it was this kind of this story that we also quite often encounter. So when something is actually being built, they start to realize that that might not be what they want, but then the execution project is already done, everything is agreed on, so it's also a bit of a difficult moment to kind of to understand how to proceed, because often the project is, let's say, finished, approved, and so on, and then changing something seems quite impossible. But although the building, once again, doesn't look like, you know, one of its neighbors, I think we are always kind of hoping that this kind of, I don't know, alien or this new and different element in the neighborhood would anyway have kind of have an impact on its context and introduce a certain change in its kind of in its surroundings, because you cannot always build something that is trying to mimic, you know, what is already there. The next story is a happy story, and it is called "I Don't Understand It, but I Like It." In this case, it was, I mean, it is still being built. It is a house, a single-family house in Lisbon, and it was one of those exceptional moments when the client actually, I think they found us online, so they were familiar with our work, and they were actually quite excited to make a house with us. And it's a very interesting project. It's a house that we call it a house of countless windows. It's a house that has more windows than it should, more levels than it should. So it's a house of split levels. It's a project that is kind of quite confusing because it's trying to disguise actually the scale of the house. It seems bigger than it actually is, and kind of it's a very playful project that actually happened again due to, you know, a lot of limitations and restrictions of the site. So we had to learn kind of how to actually fit a house into such a plot. And then the inside space has a few exceptions. There is a dome. There is a series of a bulb. Sorry, not a dome. There is a series of glass bricks on the inside, and you see that the plan is quite simple, quite kind of straightforward in a way. There is a staircase in the middle, and then there is kind of a room on each side. But then when you see the section, you understand that it is actually a house of split levels. So it was something that we introduced at some point in order to actually fit the program within the limited space. And then if you look at the section, you see that the window is actually not kind of in the middle of the wall as you would expect, but there are two windows on each level. One window is actually at the ground, and then one window is at the top. So it's a house that is not quite a house. It is a house that is kind of challenging your understanding of how to live in a house, of how to occupy the space. It is also a house that is inverted, so all the bedrooms, all the private spaces, they are below, and in this case the kitchen and the living space, they happen above, and that's why you see the wall in sections. So kind of it signifies the kind of the most special space of the house. And then the sidewalls of the house are painted in white, in dark blue, and then kind of the layers of glass brick, they produce a strange effect. So it's a very small, but it's a very complex space and kind of almost complex labyrinth to navigate. You see in this wireframe drawing that it is so so full of elements, so rich in its part, and it's again about overlay of many layers and of many surfaces. And once again, we were trying to kind of follow this, let's say, this idea of remaining consistent. So the house, as we often describe it, it is actually one room repeated, I don't know, 6 or 7 times, because it is always the bedroom that has the bathroom. And if you kind of read the series of collages, you see that every room has the same set of elements. There is always the concrete ceiling, the marble floor, there is the glass brick wall, well, on both sides actually, and then there is the series of small openings on the wall. And then only above, once again, you see the wall is happening, you see a small cornice of elements, you also see the kind of the flying hood of the kitchen. So the series of exceptions are rather happening on the top, kind of on the top level of the house. And now that it's being finished, I think it's also very interesting to actually navigate on the inside and to kind of to see these layers of glass brick wall. I mean, we are also very curious to see how the house would function when you turn the light in one room. How would it impact kind of the other room? And to go back to the clients, they were always kind of on board with every decision. They liked what they saw, but I think they were not quite understanding what they saw. They also come to the construction site quite often. They follow up, but there are no. They are not scared in this case, although I think it is a quite radical way to live in a house, but they seem to be very excited about the project, and it's going to be finished, I think, in 1 month or so. Another project, in this case, also kind of a collective housing, so a small one, but anyways, and this story is a story of overlooked lines, dots, and colors. This project is also currently under construction. This is one of the latest photos, and it was once again a project from an investor. So they were quite open-minded in terms of, let's say, its qualities. It was the square meters and the typologies and all of that they were interested in. And we call this the story of overlooked lines, dots, and colors, because as you see, the facade of the house is actually wrapped in this pattern that goes all the way around it. And it was overlooked. It was not overlooked by the client, but in this case, it was rather overlooked by the municipality, I would say, because when we submit a permit drawing, we of course specify everything, but at the same time, these drawings, they never have colors. They are always vague enough, and then they see a building that is kind of following all the requirements. It follows the heights, it has kind of windows, it all seems to be all right. So in this case, kind of the playful aspect of the project was never imagined by the city, and I think this allowed for such an exception to happen within the urban scape. On the inside, the space is quite small. It has 2 apartments that are kind of studio apartments, and then it has kind of this duplex typology on the above. But the space on the inside kind of is mostly impacted by actually the circulation space that goes throughout the entire house. And here on the section, you can see how the staircase actually has an impact on each one of the rooms. So the geometry of the interior space is once again quite it allows for a lot of juxtapositions and kind of strange intersection, which produces a space that we find to be very exciting. And the project in this case has, I would say, two main layers or two main ingredients. So one of them would be this kind of elevation that goes all around the building. So this kind of very dense pattern that is assembled out of 3 tones of marble. And then the inside layer, which is kind of all of those moments of exception, all of those moments of juxtaposition and intersection of surfaces, and all of those moments are also emphasized in the actual material. So all of those moments are going to be painted in blue in the project to highlight them and to celebrate those moments actually. And those are a few photos of the building from 3 days ago. You can already see kind of a strange intersection on the left between the curved wall and the the stepped surface. You see the curved wall of one of the bathrooms. And this is again a comprehensive drawing that is kind of summarizing the project, which in this case is quite fragmented, one would say, but at the same time, the facade, I think, the facade happens to be kind of the main unifying element, or something that kind of holds all the craziness together. This story is a story of ourselves as clients, because actually a few years ago we did our own office, and some of my colleagues are also living above this office. So it was a project of kind of a house and atelier, as we call it. It was a renovation, so we bought a building that is, let's say, quite central, a building that is also quite messy. So you see it was in bad condition, it was abandoned for 20 years. And you see that in the back, it was quite a mess of volumes and annexes and so on. So the usual story kind of this overlay of, small renovations and so on. And the same chaos on the inside. So a lot of small rooms, a lot of rooms that actually don't have any light, and so on and so forth. And step A in this project was, of course, to demolish everything, to clean up the plan a bit, and then to increase the building a bit. You also see that the outline of the plan is kind of a challenge on its own, because it's not a square, it's not a rectangle. It has one wall that is a bit curved. It has 2 walls that are tilted. So it is a project that has already kind of a lot of limitations, or a lot of conditions that are kind of predefined. And then it was about trying to fit a few very different programs within kind of such a bizarre space. And the programs in this case were, so the office, which is the kind of the space on the ground floor. Then we wanted to do one kind of studio apartment in the middle, and then there was a bigger apartment above. And being our own clients was of course a kind of a fascinating moment. So it was about finding kind of the right balance between, wanting to do all the crazy ideas, because now we can, but then also, keeping in mind the budget, and kind of keeping in mind all the restrictions, and then trying to be reasonable. So kind of we had to be the good and the bad cop at the same time. And I think the project in a way is quite, it has the right degree, let's say, of seriousness, and it has also the right kind of the right amount of playfulness, and it has some sense of humor. You see that it has 3 doors, so each door leading to one of the levels, and then you see that there's only one pink door, and the pink door is actually the office door. You see a small crown on top, which was kind of an extension that we added to make a higher space in one of the apartments. The back facade is also quite quite precise, and it has a direct relationship to the program. So there is a big window for the office on the ground floor, and then you have kind of smaller openings for the apartments. Then you have a freestanding column that is the sense of the sense of humor part, and the column is kind of a playful element on the outside. It is there to, it is there to hide the window frame. It is there to balance the elevation. It might look like the column, is actually holding the facade, but then it doesn't. So it was a joyful element that we introduced within the project. And then we are always saying that in the office we actually have three kinds of columns. So one of them would be the outside one, which is kind of completely nonsensical. Then one of them, the one next to the window, is structural, and then this one in the very front is architectural, because it could have been avoided, because you can just have the beam continuing to until the wall, but we decided to cut it and introduce the column to to once again introduce an element in the space that would populate it, that would add character and some kind of charisma to the space. And this project is also a lot about actually the idea of of elements that are repeated on all the levels, because one of them is the office and the two of them are houses. So it was also about finding the logic to make all those spaces related to each other. And you see that the two of them, they have the concrete beams. There's always the door, the circle. There is the same pavement that goes all around it, and even the same grid of joints that is repeated on every level that no one can ever see, but at the same time, in our minds, it connects all of it together. Then there is the tall space on the upper apartment. There's also the same door every time. So it was about quite different spatial logics that are acted out within the same materials and within the same set of elements. And this was precisely the moment that was holding the project together. Another project is a story of an abstract corner building with an elegant crown. So this one was also an early project. It was also a difficult one, because I think the clients were changing, the owners were changing. So there was a lot of delay. There was a lot of some kind of bureaucratic mess. But we, in a way, we were the constant that remained, because we were the architects. We submitted the permit, so even if the owner was changing, we had to be the one who's going to finish the project, and that was just it. And the building was actually quite an important building. It is one of these modernist building in the very city center of Porto, so we were very proud to do it. And it was meant to be a set of apartments. This would be the plan of the typical level. So you see a lot of rooms, and then the same plan is repeated many times. And in the beginning, our proposal was, I would say, quite radical. You see, so the concrete beam was exposed, the curtain was introduced to subdivide the space. You see the crazy kitchen. So there is a white background and a few moments that are populating the space. But then, then the change in clients happened. Also real estate agents happened, so all of it. And the project actually ended up to be quite turned down and white. So although the beam is still exposed, there is no curtain, there is a normal white kitchen. But well, anyway, we made our peace with it. But there was another part of this project that couldn't, there was no chance to change it, which was this annex on top of the building. And this annex was also approved in the permit, so it actually had to be built the way we wanted it to build. And That's why we called it kind of an abstract building with this kind of jewel crown on top, because indeed the bottom part of the building is kind of it's an abstract white volume, both from the outside and from the inside, because kind of all of it was yeah, it had to be rethought. But then the marble annex on top for us is again one of those joyful elements that that we are nevertheless proud of. And now I think I'm trying to in the lecture to shuffle a bit the happy story and the sad story, but yeah, all of them are kind of part of the of being an architect, and we are kind of trying to be honest about it. And this story is the story of our favorite client, because he's not Portuguese, he's also an architect, and his his engagement or his relationship with us started when he got an apartment in Lisbon, and he asked us to renovate the apartment for him to live in. He was also extremely open-minded, extremely supportive, and I think he was always kind of excited about our proposals. And he also allowed us to experiment, to try things, and he was kind of always on board with weird and unconventional solutions. So this apartment was the first project that we did with him. I think it was meant to be his kind of summer house, but then I think the market prices started going up, and he actually realized that selling it would be a great idea, and he sold it. So he was never actually living in it. But after selling it, he decided to reinvest his money, and he did another project with us, which was a slightly bigger one this time. So in this case, it was again collective housing, and this one was in Porto this time. And as you can see, he was the one who allowed for that stripy marble facade to happen. He was the one excited about it, and the project was, I think, for us quite important at the time. This facade, I'm sure most of you have seen this facade, or kind of this. I think this image would be the first one that shows up if you Google the name of our office. But this project was very important for us at the time, because I think it was kind of the first actual facade that we ever did. Because before we would always work with interior spaces or renovations and so on. So in this case, actually building something that would have an outside expression was an important moment, and that's why we also maybe went crazy, and we were at the time kind of excited about this idea of making a tall facade that is almost a billboard, that is kind of disguising what is happening behind it. But nevertheless, it was built, and I think having this client being on board with this facade for us was kind of an extremely important moment. And then the other project was also sold. It was once again built for an investment, and he decided to do a third project with us, which was also housing, kind of collective housing kind of program. It was different typologically from all the previous one. It was something that is called ilha in Portuguese, which would mean an island. So previously it was this kind of social housing that is rather, in the kind of, it's never on the street. It is rather somewhere in between backyards. So you kind of have to get in where somehow, through this small streets and corridors. And this project is also a challenge in how to live, what is a house. And in this case, since it's a renovation, we were very limited by the very small size of the unit. So kind of we had to design a house that is actually quite tiny. And the logic in this case was to introduce kind of this double height space, to introduce a second level, which is kind of a bit of a mezzanine. So the bedroom was located on the upper level. And you see that in this case we have 6 houses. So 4 of them are the same. One is a bit different. One is tiny. So although kind of the plan allows for a few exceptions in this case, again, the same principle for all of them and the same set of materials for all of them kind of again provided, you know, a consistent reading of the project, and kind of it holds it together once again. And the geometry of the space was also a theme here. So on kind of in the typical apartment, there was a curved wall that is introduced kind of to hide the bathroom, and then the diagonal wall was introduced to accommodate the bedroom above. And then for the outside volume, all of it was covered with a sloped, very thin metal roof, and the roof was actually held by by a series of very thin metal pillars, which created kind of this gallery space or this kind of circulation space in front of the house. And those houses, they are also located kind of in front of a big garden. So it was a very good exercise in this kind of collective housing around a common courtyard. So it was really a living together with your neighbors kind of situation. Now we have, I think, 3 of our interns living there, because this project is meant to be rented, and this I think already happens for the 2nd year, because the client, he happily rents it to us, and we are still kind of having a very close relationship with this project, because we go there often and so on. And as I said, the inside space is quite small, but then at the same time it's quite complex due to the relationship between the 2 walls, so the curved wall and the diagonal wall, and then all of these kind of is cut by the pink surface of the ceiling. There is a narrow staircase, a handrail, so kind of it was kind of a small challenge of, you know, reinventing such a small unit, and conceiving a living space there that is not expected, or that is a bit unconventional. And yeah, in the wireframe you can see that this project is also a lot about kind of repetition of the module, repetition of the same element, and so on and so on. So this project, in a way, is kind of has layers of those kind of repeated elements, and the overlay of those elements, it kind of it actually constitutes the project on its own. Another story, a strange one. So the title of this story is it's complicated, because the client was also a difficult one, let's say. So this one is a story of a house. It was a house for a single person. So the client in this case bought a small 1-level house also in the suburbs of Porto, and it was meant to be converted into kind of into a house with 1 bedroom and one big living space. And in this case, the palette, the house is quite abstract. The palette of materials is quite concise, so it is mostly white with a few exceptions. And at the same time, the number of gestures that was introduced is also quite minimal, I would say, because it's a small 1-level house. I would say that the 2 things that we did was to introduce a curved wall that would separate the living and the private spaces, and then to intersect this curved wall with a high sloped roof, and that was mostly it. The rest of it is kind of this. The rest of it is the result of this intersection. So it produces a living room that is open. It produces a room that has kind of just 1 corner, and it's almost connecting to the garden. You see that the materiality here is quite well. It has the white, it has the blue doors, and basically that's it. So it's a very kind of, it's a very abstract, very very minimal kind of project, although I wouldn't say that we describe ourselves as a minimalist, but once again, I think it was also the result of kind of navigating with the client. I think it also had quite a small budget, so all the decisions were kind of done based on that as well. And what is peculiar about the client here is that although she was participating in the project, but in a strange way. I think she was convinced that every decision was actually her idea, which was not the case, but which was fine by us. But the funny part about that house is that when it was finished and she was living there for, I don't know, a year or so, I think at some point she got contacted by a Japanese client, if I'm not mistaken, and they offered to actually buy her house, and she sold it right away. But I think it was also probably a very good proposition. So now, I think the clients, they saw the house online and they just contacted her directly because they were really excited about the project. So that was that story. Another project, which is an ongoing project, the construction, I think, is about to start maybe in summer, and this one is about going from very exciting to relatively normal, which happens quite often, to be honest. But I think in case of this specific project, it was very dear to us in the beginning, and it was a project that had two iterations. It was a project. I mean, it is a project in Lisbon. It was an investment, so it was supposed to be a renovation, and it was supposed to be converted into, I don't know, an X number of apartments, 3, 4, or 5, and I think in the beginning, the clients, they were quite radical and quite excited, and they were extremely open-minded, and we were designing once again radical typologies and spaces that are quite complex. So the project was this is not the plan of the project, rather a diagram of the plan, but it was it was about systems of elements and then overlay of those systems, and you see that the geometry of the plan is quite insane. And then there is the layer of structure, there is the layer of kind of those very free open walls, there is the layer of cabinets, pavement. You also see that there is kind of this open corner of the glass. So the project for us was about this kind of systems of elements, and then making those systems meet, and then also finding ways to figure out exceptions. It was very radical at the time, and we went as far as we finished even the execution drawings of the project. So it was fully done, fully approved, and then the clients changed their minds, and they realized that they want rather normal apartments. They started to be a bit more precise with the typologies, wanted type 1, type 2 here, everything, wanted to make the most out of it, the most amount of square meters, and so on. So going a bit more in line, let's say, with the real estate market. And those are the plans of the same project, but as it is going to be built. And I mean, although it has kind of a degree of not craziness, but those are probably not the most normal plans of the most normal apartments. But at the same time, if you compare the two, you see that this one, I don't know, almost looks like a strange painting, while this one is rather normal, or closer to normal as it would be before. So the project, the project was kind of was going its second iteration. So once again, we had to turn down a few parameters. So the facade also became kind of, a wall with a series of openings, although we still managed to kind of introduce the theme of kind of those rows of elements and patterns and so on. And you see that the apartments are quite straightforward, and they also kind of depending on the level, there is a bit of a change in terms of how the walls are organized and depending on the topology. But the project is it became much more, let's say, digestible and understandable for the clients. And this was the kind of its second version that is actually going to be built. And I think this kind of stories, they happen more than once for us, of course. But in this specific case, I think we were very excited about the first version, but then, well, it happens. And then the final chapter of the lecture. So project number 97, and the story is called 𝗕𝗿𝗵𝗁. So it's a house, but not the typical house that you would imagine. It is something that happens in Porto quite often lately, actually, also due to this kind of real estate craziness. So all the actual houses and apartments are becoming more and more expensive to buy, but people found a way, and now now already those are also expensive. But there was a moment in time when people started buying, those spaces on the ground floor of buildings. So they were former garages or former shops. They would always have the street front. They would often have also a small backyard because they would be on the ground floor of a housing block. So those spaces were actually quite livable, or they were also, we did a few projects like this, and those are also nice, nice explorations on how to make a house out of a former garage and so on. And this project had different clients. It had a few iterations. But it was, it is something like this. You see the ground floor of the housing block, and then you see kind of the backyard situation in the back. And at first, we had one set of clients for this project. We did the first proposal for them with this kind of facade that was inspired by Venturi's sleep house. So you see the stripes, you see the flying triangle. So it is very rich kind of in its language and its expression. And we were also extremely excited about this project. It was it had double height spaces. We had to remove the slab, so it was quite quite complex. But it also produced an amazing set of spaces. And I think we finished the execution for that project. It was once again all done, and the client said, no, it's too much. Okay, so then we proposed a second iteration on the same project. So you see the image kind of between the two. It's quite different. You see that it's becoming much more much more modest and normal, if that's the right word. We did the second version. It was approved. I think we even did the second set of execution drawings, and they decided not to build it. They decided to actually sell it, and maybe they were moving out of country. I don't quite remember, but the project was not happening, and they were looking for potential buyers for this property. And the project was bought by an American couple, and I think this is the moment to say that I think they are also our favorite clients from now on, because the work that we were doing with them was extremely engaging, challenging in a good way, and they, although they didn't know us before, I think they started working with us because the previous clients referred to us, but they got to know us, they got to know how we work, and I think they have by now they have kind of a great, amazing understanding of how we actually operate and so on. And this was the third iteration of the same project for different clients now, but this was the one that was actually built. As I said, the space is quite kind of unexpected, so it's not an easy space to fit in a house, because you see that the space is quite long and you only have windows on one side here and on one side there. So kind of a bit of a space in the middle is kind of dark or lost. So it is a funny exercise on how to conceive a house out of it. And in this case, we introduced basically one element on each level, which was a curved glass brick wall, which was kind of connecting both fronts. And this glass brick wall was also allowing for kind of all the light to come through, because glass brick is transparent. So even all the spaces behind the glass brick wall, they were still getting some light from the main space. And you see that the curve on every level was actually dividing the space. So between the public and the private, and the space is kind of inverted on each level. So on one level, the public space is below, and then on the lower level, it's actually on the upper part, which is also producing a nice inversion. And I mean, I also put the selfie that Philip did with the client when going to the construction site, because as I said, they were very engaged. They were excited about all the crazy proposals that we would show them for the facade or anything, and they even challenged us in a good way. We tend to think that the things we are showing to our clients sometimes are already, too crazy, but in their case, they said, no, it's not crazy enough. So that was, I think that was literally the first time that that happened to us. And in case of this project, the facade, both facades are actually quite an experiment for us, and it was quite a kind of a project within a project. So if the space on the inside is defined by kind of the curved glass brick wall on both levels, then kind of with a few elements introduced here and there. In this case, it was also a very special kitchen and so on. But then the kind of if the two curves, they kind of produce the skeleton of the project, but then the skeleton is framed with the two with the two masks, so with the two facades that are quite quite unique in our eyes. So the facade is actually a set of layers, of this metal mesh, and then you see that there is a cutout within the layer. There is the triangular handrail that is in front. So there is the pattern of the of the black marble dots and so on. There is the red column, the layer of window, the mirror. So the facade is literally kind of an overlay of a lot of materials, a lot of elements, and it produces this kind of very strong, but at the same time very light figure. And then at night, it also turns into kind of a very different story due to because it's a glass facade, and then it's kind of transparent, and then the metal mesh disappears, and you only see the outline of the window. So the project was quite radical, but I think the clients, they allowed for this radicality to happen. They allowed for kind of a lot of a lot of crazy moments to happen. They were very precise in giving their feedback to us. They were very precise in kind of giving their brief to us and so on. So we are extremely happy about the project. They are extremely happy about the project, and they still go. I mean, we still meet for dinner once in a while. They go to our exhibitions, and it's a really, for us, it was an extremely kind of educational, and this is our dream client, and we would honestly we were so happy to work with them. And well, of course, that was the last short story in the presentation, and to kind of to finish on the positive note. But I also wanted to kind of to wrap it up. I wanted to show a couple of images that are from the two projects that we're currently working on. So the two projects that are about to be built. And the image on the left is actually a 3D render of a house that I am building for, or that I am going to build for myself. And then the image on the right is a render of a house that another one of my colleagues is also making for himself. And it is again kind of the moment of being your own client. And I think it is it is a very important exercise for us once again. Because you have to kind of to navigate all the craziness and all the budget concerns and everything, and you in the end you have to live in the project that you designed, and you have to you have to learn, and you have to understand that, okay, maybe this one wasn't so good, such a good idea, maybe this one is not so comfortable, and maybe this corner is a bit wrong. So I think I'm very excited about this next chapter of actually having to live we are now working in our own office, but having to live in your own house is also something I think that is kind of almost mandatory for every architect. And let's see if those are going to be comfortable, cold, crazy, convenient or not. But I think it's something that we will happily learn. And yeah, I think on that point, this is it. 14 short stories are over, and thank you once again for the invitation. We were very, very happy to do it.
Thank you, Lara, for the lecture. And now welcome, Felipe, to our discussion. First of all, I have to say that I'm glad we finally meet, although online. So next time, I hope we can welcome you in Bangkok in person. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Think, yes, for our discussion, I think perhaps there are three main topics that we can go through. First, about the clients, then maybe about your working direction, and later, perhaps if we have time, about a larger context of Portuguese architecture in relation to your work. The first thing that I want to hear from you is that I think it's revealing that you organize a lecture through different stories about the clients and the projects. So the question I have is that despite this diversity of your clients, you seem to have a certain freedom to think through the projects in your own way. So I mean, the question is, do you see your clients' requirements as very specific and personal? Or, I mean, are they more abstract and more universal? Because ownership of buildings can change, or sometimes the clients are anonymous investors, which can be frustrating for most of us. But for you, I think this provides opportunities. So can you talk a little bit about how you see your clients' inputs and influences in relation to your own working direction?
Yes, of course. First of all, thank you for the invitation once again, and thank you for this conversation. I'm really happy to finally meet you.
Yes, finally.
even if digitally.
Yes.
Well, the client is fundamental. I think very few architects can build without clients, and we are, of course, not an exception. We need the clients, and it is also true that many times our clients are not the most interesting figures in the universe. So we have to deal with this kind of not so ambitious condition. But I think that what ends up happening is that every single client is different in a way or another. Even if they have a certain similarity, they are different. And our role is, to a certain extent, to explore their eccentricities to their furthest. And what ends up happening most of the times is that we are the constant. So each of the projects that we built, it was of course discussed, approved, debated, and the clients are happy with them. And what we see as, I could say, a constant between all the islands, so what defines the archipelago, if we could say it like this, is the fact that, let's say, project decisions we made are always made by us. So even if all the personalities are different of all the clients, we end up becoming the constant, and we manage to make them all our projects to a certain extent. So they are always for that specific person, that specific private client, but they are always ours. And we could say that each of them is a fusion dish between us and anonymous clients. But it is also important to say that we as architects, we have to do two things. We provide a service. We cannot forget that. We are paid to design a house, so we cannot design a bakery.
Yes,
but
exactly. Yeah.
at the same time, we are asked to be thinkers before being makers. So we need to be able to, at the same time, question what the client asks us to do, and bring something more than just answering the question. So we need to bring some discussion, and all of this ends up happening at the same time, I would say.
Yes, thank you. Now, about the projects and your working direction, I think your practice is about 8 years old, 8 or 9 years old, right? So within a relatively short span of time, I mean, looking backward to all your work, what is amazing to me is that the train of thoughts is very coherent. It seems that each of your projects sort of contribute to a clear direction, building an integrated body of work. So the question is, did you see or decide from the beginning where you stand? Or, I mean, did it just happen from one project to the next? Did you try, I mean, with your partners to define your working direction from the beginning of your practice?
No way, no way. We were just lucky. We were just in the right place at the right time. No, we started the office almost by accident at the Nakajin Tower in Japan. Well, that is now being demolished this week. And what ended up happening is that different projects, commissions, and limitations, they ended up defining everything. Most of our vocabulary comes from a certain constrained set of, budget, brief, client requirements, etc. So there's a certain repetition. Once we were told that our spaces look quite domestic, and I said, yes, we only design houses. What choice did we have? So there is a certain repetition. But all the things we are doing, the enlargement of the tropes vocabulary and all of that is happening in a more or less organic way. So we don't really have a plan on when we are going, but we are very clear and very aware of the things we don't want to do. So many of the conversations we have with our clients, mostly in the first 2 or 3 meetings, are about the things we should not do. Either because, well, they don't answer to the project, they don't answer to the brief, they don't answer to the regulation, but also because we are not interested in certain topics. And so since we have this basis of honesty, and the client can accept 1,000 different things, if we exclude the 500 we don't want, we end up just discussing the 500 we would want. And from that point onwards, it just grows very organically. So yeah, I don't think we ever sat down to say in the next 5 years we're going to do this, we're going to do that. I don't think that ever happened. What normally happens is one project, one circle, one stripe at a time. Things keep evolving.
And eventually everything sort of comes together. I think it's just amazing to me. Yes.
I think that has to do with the constant I was talking about. The fact that it's always the 6, 7, 8 of us, depending. And the core team has been together for 7 years. So the same 6 people working together in the same room. And then, of course, once there's a collaborator or 2 that come and go, but the same 6 people thinking kind of in the same way. Like the discussions are very funny. Our project discussions sometimes are about no one says anything and we just make noise like or no or maybe, and we kind of understand each other almost without speaking,
without having to say a lot.
And
right?
it's and sometimes someone says, I tried it like this, I turned it upside down, and all of us look like, oh yes, that's right, that's the right answer. And we just kind of found a balance in that system that is not a system at all. It's actually quite anarchic, I have to say. Yes. But it's very funny to work here, and we really like to work it like that.
Another question I have is about the image. I mean, this seemingly representational dimension of your work. I mean, in a way, your practice seems to express a few qualities that we may identify as postmodern, either as a structure of thought or as a formal or stylistic point of view. I'd like to hear your thoughts about this sense of postmodernity in your work. Is it a reaction to, or is it an avoidance of anything that is happening in architecture during the past 10 years?
I don't know. It's complicated. So recently we were asked to label ourselves, and magazines love labels. They love to put us in a drawer and say, these work together, those work together.
And sometimes labeling, they don't work that way. Right?
Yeah, it's very difficult. And I think that, yes, to a certain extent, we are postmoderns because we happen after modernity. So we live within that condition. But I think that if you really go and you really go into this new trends and new philosophical debates more than the social ones, I think we are more meta-moderns. This idea of a certain cynical naivete that comes from a generation of people that understood that the world has changed and they want to keep changing it but don't have the power to do so. So we end up having to do small pixels of a big picture. And I think that we are indeed dealing with a complex moment because architecture is not about architecture per se anymore. So social matters are more and more important. And you can see that by looking at architecture prizes, for example. What happened to the Pritzker Prize? We even did a lecture recently about this topic. And I think that we are very much concerned, almost in a selfish way, with our own work and with the discipline and with what we could call the disciplinary discussions. But it is unavoidable that we are caught in this hurricane of political debates going on. So we are still learning how to answer to those questions, because it's not that we are against sustainability. It's just that we prefer not to start our conversation by talking about it. For the same reason we are not against plumbing, and all our buildings have plumbing working perfectly. So I just think that it is difficult today for a practice like ours to remain pure, in the sense that the things that we really want to talk about and present are disciplinary, and maybe the audience for a disciplinary discussion is not there anymore. So the world is changing, and we need to adapt. We need to understand how to belong to the time we occupy today.
Yeah, and perhaps to discuss it further, I'd like to ask about this sort of graphic quality of the space, because today, I mean, many architects, myself, for example, we try to avoid any representational details because we are afraid that they would be cosmetic. But you don't seem to have a problem with that. I mean, in your work, you seem to consciously address the surface or the visual image, and I don't see them as purely cosmetic. They seem to play a very important role in defining the spaces. So that's what I read from your work, but I'd like to hear it from you about this, maybe a sort of the beautification of the surface. I mean, what role do they play, I mean, in your thinking process?
Yes, of course. No, the surface, I would argue that the surface, or this kind of graphical condition, is more important than the building itself. I'm going to say that, you know, Shinohara in the mid-70s, in the mid-60s actually, theorized the idea of the beautifully choreographed fictions. That the fiction that he was creating via the photos, the documents, the text, the drawings, was more important than the building, because he knew the building was going to get demolished at some point, but the fiction would prevail over time. And to us, it's kind of the same thing. So, for example, I don't know, but I assume you never visited any of our buildings, but you have an understanding of those buildings because there's a fiction that exists in images, books, or websites. And I think more and more and more being very conscious about this, which is a very meta-modern condition, is important. And we are perfectly aware that we were born in an age where, you know, we are not more important, more relevant, or more let's say, we don't matter more than Adolf Loos. But if you go on Google, we exist more than Adolf Loos. Even if most people never visited our buildings, but they know we exist. So we need to be at the same time happy because we live in this time, and so we celebrate it. But we also need to be critical and understand that this is a virtual reality. It's a meta-modern condition. So to answer your question, yes, that graphical quality, that idea that the building becomes more than a body and becomes a set of elements that are displayed in a certain system that create a certain depth, a certain set of relations, and so on and so forth, to us matters more than the house, the happiness of the family that lives there, you know, if the construction is going to last or not. Of course, we want this construction to last. Of course, we want it to be sustainable. Of course, we want the family to be happy. But as a practice, it matters more to us the beautifully choreographed fiction than it matters the, let's say, happiness of the users. And I know this is very polemical to say, but and our clients are happy, I have to say it. So we don't have, most of our clients, I think the ones we keep contact with, they really like to live in the houses. But the houses, after we finish them and we photograph them, we don't go back. They just become treasure of the past. And there's a very beautiful book from Italo Calvino, The Invisible Cities, that has one city that is Tecla. That is the city that is always being built. And when it's finished construction, they stop and they start another one. Because no one lives in the city, because there's a promise of a beauty of the next day is always better. But when it's done, it's going to start going down because it's going to get dirty and used. We identify a lot with Tecla. Like we like our buildings and we leave them with such an intensity during construction, design. We debate every single corner, every handle, every skirting. And then we take the photos and we don't care anymore and we leave. Because the photos become the fiction we will preserve forever.
Yeah, that's true. Then this is related to a question from the audience about the collage as your a working tool. I got a question from the audience about collage because your collages seem to stand between something real and something ideal. So can you say a little bit more about your collages and their role in your design or thinking process?
Yes, of course. And I think to continue on what I said before, I think the collage, the plan, the photo of the building, they are all of equal importance. I would say that a building, so the actual built building is just a representation of the project to a certain extent to us. So if the collage is just a representation of the project itself, they are of equal importance. And the collage to us is a way of, in a way, as the question suggested, suggesting something very real. So this is exactly what it's going to be, but at the same time, it's not at all what it's going to be. So you don't have the detail, you don't have the handle, you don't have this, you don't have that. So when you are discussing with, as we discussed before, clients that many times are not very interested in architecture, this detachment, this running away from hyper-realism gives us a margin, gives us air, gives us a buffer zone where we can negotiate the architectural intentions. If everything is too real, then we are going to start discussing, as I said, handles and details and the taps, and we don't want that. We want to focus our projects on the architectural intentions. So the collage becomes a technique to both represent reality and run away from it. It becomes a very simplistic tool because in a few minutes you can build a collage and quickly test some ideas, and collages are working drawings like an AutoCAD file. You can, with the same collage, you can keep doing versions and versions and test and turn around and add information, remove information. And then they become a document of sorts. So they prevail the time of construction, they prevail over the time of demolition, and they exist in parallel with the photos. And many times we even like to put them side by side, the photo and the collage, to kind of see exactly what survived the whole process and what changed and why. A collage, I think a collage and the wireframe and the plan and all of these are just means to an end. But at the same time, they are never on themselves.
Now, I'm also wondering about the program because while many architects are trying to create sort of innovative program or looking for new programs that challenge something like social issues, it seems that Fala is content with pragmatic, prosaic, or sometimes even banal program. But within that pragmatic program, you seem to redefine the typologies. For example, the new housing typologies that are evident in all of your design. So the question is, how do you see the relationship between the program and your design, or I mean the program and the thinking and the design process? In a sense, I mean, is there any sense of you trying to reinvent or I mean redefine the program?
So one of the qualities, I mean, I think it is a quality we try to introduce to our projects is that they are flexible. And they are flexible, not in the sense that you have walls that move around and flexible panels, but they have a lack of typology, almost, you could say. So no typology. So forcing the user to be the one that has to interact with it and discover it. A little bit more like a cave and less like a nest, because the nest is designed for a specific function. A cave is not designed for anything, so you have to find a way to accommodate to it. So our architecture is closer to the cave concept. And very often, at least in the commercial market, you would expect the typology to work in a certain way, to be repetitive, to always do the same thing, and so on. And we love to tackle that. We love to kind of go around that. We love to do a typology that it's everything but what is expected. And we like to see how the people that will live there will react to it. And many times also, because we do renovations sometimes, we do transformations, like the last project that Lara presented is a garage that became a house. So it's not expectable that it is a normal house because it's not possible. It's too deep, too narrow. So we really celebrate those. We prefer to design a space to live in such conditions because we know whatever happens, it will never be a traditional house. And it will force the user to never be able to use it as a traditional house and therefore to invent his own typology. Yes. And sometimes even with the topology of the typology, because the typology keeps kind of rotating and changing. Yeah. And that's very exciting to us. So, and that's also a very disciplinary discussion. The deconstruction of the traditional typological understanding of what a house is or is not. And most of our clients, when they show up and they ask us to design a house, they know exactly what they want, or at least they think so. And they tell us exactly what they expect, and they always design in the paper like kind of the same arrangement for the house. And at the end, we end up designing something else that they truly like and admire, because we understand, as I said before, everyone is actually different and they expect different things. They just assume they need to have exactly the same as their neighbor. So our role is a bit to instigate that discovery.
Yes. Okay. And also in relation to this notion of typology and origin, I get a sense that there is something both familiar and strangely unfamiliar about your work. I mean, sometimes we recognize something that as if we have seen it before in the past or somewhere, but at the same time, we cannot really point out what it is. So the question is, how do you view perhaps history or historical context or notion of origin in relation to your work?
And we recycle. So I don't think we truly invent anything. So I can point out for every column, every dot, every pattern we did, and I can tell you it comes from here, from here, from here, and it mixes this and this and this. And I think every time we do a project, or even every time we do a column that does not touch the ceiling or something like that, it's just a fusion dish. It's just a fusion moment where an intent from Bramante plus graphical quality from Brancusi plus certain constructive ambition from Caesar, they all come together in that column. But even if none of these authors would accept that, they would say, no, this is not it, but it is just that. And so, yes, we often go to history, or in our case, to our bookshelf, to our heroes, to find answers to the questions we are asked. And we deal very well with that. Nothing is lost, nothing is gained, everything is transformed, kind of.
Yes. And now perhaps this puts us back into a larger context, in your case, the context of Portuguese architecture. Because to me, as an outsider, Portuguese architecture seems to be defined by, of course, two Pritzkers, Álvaro Siza and Eduardo Salto de Moura, and also what we know as the Porto school. The question is, how do you see yourself in that context? I mean, do you associate yourself with a certain continuity within Portuguese architecture, or do you associate more with a sort of a disruption or a break within that context? I mean, do you think your work is perceived differently in Portugal or outside Portugal?
Yes. So we are often told abroad that we are very Portuguese, and then we are told at home that we are not Portuguese enough. So
this is exactly my question. Yeah.
So we like to hear that comment, because we always feel like, isn't that a nice place to be? So
yes.
Not good enough, not enough something on both ends. No, but I think that for sure we respect and we admire 𝗔𝗦𝗔 𝗬𝗎 to a full extent, and we are their continuity from a logical and geographical point of view. We are working the same context, we are continuing to a certain extent their work. But it is true that from a disciplinary perspective, we have very different interests. We are doing very different projects. We are dealing with very different clients. We are having to somehow reinvent ourselves in a way that is not relatable to them. So the same way that we are not Portuguese enough here and too Portuguese abroad, I would say that we are in continuity with them, but we are not in continuity with them. So we are logically looking at them, as we said, we are looking back, we are learning from them to do whatever it is we are doing, but at the same time, we are interested in other things. So we don't, contrary to most of the Portuguese offices in Portugal, we look at 𝗔𝗦𝗔 𝗬𝗎 as much as we look at Peter Markley, Robert Ventura and Dennis Brown, Kazuo Shinohara, etc., etc., etc. So we don't close ourselves into one line fits it all. We like to explore the possibility of these fusion moments and projects and architectural intentions.
Yes, thank you. I think we are running out of time. So, I mean, do you have anything else you would like to add to Alera's lecture? Just,
no, I would just add one sentence. We love architecture. We love doing architecture. That's it. And I think it's, although we work on this from 9 to 5 every day, this is not a job. This is just a passion.
Yes, exactly. And we all love architecture. I mean, to conclude, I think there are always opinions and intentions in architecture. Therefore, to me, architecture is always representational. So I think this is one of the things that we learned from Fala today. So I hope that in the near future, we will be able to hear about your architectural intentions once again in person. So thank you so much for your participation. We truly appreciate it. And I'm really glad we finally meet, although online.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure for us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Macalias, and also Professor 𝗕𝗿𝗿𝗄𝗏 for moderating the session. And on behalf of the organizer, I would like to thank you and thank all the invited speakers and moderators for taking their time to share their expertise with us today. So we sincerely hope that you will take ideas and experience back and further it with your creativities for our industrial growth. So please don't forget to visit ASA Expo, which will continue until this Sunday. And again, thank you very much. See you next year. สวัสดีค่ะ